The Elder Scrolls Online is a massive game with 7 classes now and 10 playable races, dozens of playable zones, solo content, group content, raids, PvP, crafting, housing, fashion, and so many other features. It's hard to know exactly where to start. But that's also why I created this video. Over the past 10 years, I've accumulated thousands of hours in this game and have posted hundreds of ESO builds and guides here on this channel. We've built an amazing community over the past 10 years, and I'm glad you're here with us. In this complete beginner guide for the Elder Scrolls Online, we'll cover everything you need to know from start to finish. And if you're a returning player, there's something here for you as well, as I'll be detailing ESO's newest chapter called Gold Road, and what you can expect from its newest feature called Scribing. Timestamps are provided below if you'd like to jump ahead to a section or rewatch something again for review. Speaking of review, I'll have a ton of helpful links down in the description to other ESO guides, which you can check out later for even more in-depth tips and tricks to help you get started in your ESO adventure. Thanks to Bethesda for sponsoring this video and giving me early access this year to check out their latest expansion called the Gold Road chapter. Gold Road is ESO's most ambitious expansion yet, including the brand new Scribing system, which is a precursor to spellcrafting, and lets players customize 11 brand new abilities, from weapon skills to guild skills like the Fighters Guild and Mages Guild, and even PvP. You end up with something like 4,000 different combinations of buffs and effects, so the possibilities here are basically endless. This is my favorite feature in the game right now because it lets you craft builds and playstyles that we've never been able to before. For example, I already set up a build that I call the Barbarian, which uses only 2-handed weapon skills and 0 class abilities, so it feels like a completely different class on its own. Then I crafted this unkillable Torchbearer build using the new Fighters Guild ability that reduces your damage by 30% while also dealing AoE damage and giving me minor resolve for even more armor. And like I said, this just barely scratches the surface for all the customization options that players can get with this new scribing feature. The Gold Road is also a full expansion, adding the new area of Southern Cyrodiil to the playable map in an area called the West Weald, which is also beautiful and incorporates this new autumn theme. And Gold Road also includes an impressive new 12-player trial called the Lucent Citadel, which also completely reinvents endgame ESO content, tasking players with moving a relic called the Arcane Knot through an increasingly intense gauntlet of powerful enemies. So the dev team have really gone out of their way to make the Gold Road chapter something we've never experienced before. ESO Gold Road just released on PC and Mac, and it's coming soon to Xbox and PlayStation on June 18th, and you can purchase Gold Road right now using the link down below in the pinned comment or description. And thanks again to Bethesda for sponsoring this video. So a huge part of any MMO or RPG is character creation, and the Elder Scrolls Online is no different. You'll have tons of different options here, including race and class, and of course all the sliders you could ever want. Now in terms of race, every option you would expect from previous Elder Scrolls games is built in here, but with a new system, since we are playing online, this is called factions. So each race in ESO belongs to a specific faction, but keep in mind that faction really only matters in the PvP zones of Cyrodiil and Imperial City, where you'll be placed on specific teams, aka your faction, to fight against other factions. So if you know you want a PvP, for example, with friends, make sure you know which faction they are a part of, so you can pick a race which is also part of that same faction. So our first faction is the Daggerfall Covenant. This includes 3 races, starting with Breton, then you have Orcs, and then you have Red Guards. Next up is the Aldmeri Dominion faction. This is High Elves, Wood Elves, and then Khajiit. Finally, you have the Ebonheart Pact faction. This is made up of Argonians, Dark Elf, and the Nords. Now there is a 10th race, obviously the Imperial race, which you may be familiar with. Imperials in ESO are actually a paid option because they have a couple of specific perks. If you're interested in unlocking Imperials, you'll need to purchase that as a separate purchase in ESO's Crown store. But if you do unlock the Imperial, the unique thing about them is they can belong to any faction in the game. You could join Daggerfall Covenant, you could join Aldmeri Dominion, Ebonheart Pact. All 3 factions will be open to you if you purchase the Imperial race. So how do you know which race to pick? Well, there are a couple different ways of looking at this. I think a lot of people when they're starting ESO just pick their favorite race based on the aesthetic or how it looks or what they know about that race's homeland. and that approach is totally fine. Pick your favorite Elder Scrolls race, no problem. They're all pretty similar when it comes down to it. Now, on the other hand, they do have racial passives, or basically passive bonuses that make them slightly better at different roles of gameplay. Now, the difference is not huge. There may be like a 5% difference between a more damage-focused race and a more sustain-focused race. So if you are interested in min-maxing, if you want to make ESO your job and you want to be in the top 1%, then yes, your race does make a slight difference. So I'll explain some of those differences now. One of the most important of them is the, quote, damage races, those races which have damage-focused passives. I'll go over all the passives in just a minute, but just so you can keep this in mind, those damage races are going to include Dark Elf, High Elf, Orc, and Khajiit. Then you have more sustain focus, or what I sometimes call utility races. These would be less ideal if you want to play a DPS, probably better for like a healer, or maybe for PvP if you want to focus more on sustain and recovery. Those races would include Bretons, Red Guards, Wood Elves, and to some extent Argonians. And then you have your tank-focused races. These have a bigger focus on survival, more max stats, more armor. This includes Nord and Imperial. Again, these are just generalizations, and the difference is really pretty small. But for those players who want to min-max at endgame, you may want to consider these stats. So let's review those passives next so you know exactly what you're getting into. I'll start with the Highborn passive. This increases your experience gain with the Destruction Staff skill line by 15% and increases your total experience gain by 1%. Spell Recharge passive. When you activate an ability, you restore 625 magicka or stamina based on whichever resource is lowest. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds. And when you're using an ability with a channel or cast time, you take 5% less damage. Sirbane's Boon increases your max magicka by 2,000. And finally, the Elemental Talent passive increases your weapon and your spell damage by 258. Here are the Wood Elf passives, starting with Acrobat. Increases your experience gain with the bow skill line by 15%, and decreases your fall damage taken by 10%. Hunter's Eye increases your stealth detection radius by 3 meters, and increases your movement speed by 5%, and your physical and spell penetration by 950. The Endurance passive increases your stamina recovery by 258. And finally, Resist Affliction increases your max stamina by 2,000, and your disease and poison resistance by 2,310. Khajiit start with the Cut Purse passive, increasing their experience gained with the medium armor skill line by 15%, and increasing their chance to successfully pickpocket a target by 5%. The Robustness passive increases your health recovery by 100, and your stamina and magicka recovery by 85. Lunar Blessings increases your maximum health, magicka, and stamina pools by 915. And finally, the Feline Ambush passive increases your critical damage and critical healing by 12%, and decreases your detection radius in stealth by 3 meters. Bretons start with the Opportunist passive. This increases your experience gained with the light armor skill line by 15%, and increases your alliance points gained by 1%. The Gift of Magnus passive increases your max magicka by 2,000. The Spell Attunement passive increases your spell resistance by 2310. This effect is also doubled if you're afflicted with the Burning, Chilled, or Concussed status effect, and this also increases your magicka recovery by 130. Finally, Bretons also have the Magicka Mastery passive, which reduces the magicka cost of your abilities by 7%. Orcs start with the Craftsman passive. This increases your experience gain with the Heavy Armor skill line by 15%, and increases your crafting inspiration gained by 10%. The Brawny passive increases your maximum stamina by 1,000. The Unflinching Rage passive increases your maximum health by 1,000. And when you deal damage, you heal for 2125 health. This effect can occur once every 4 seconds. Finally, the Swift Warrior passive increases your weapon and spell damage by 258, and reduces the cost of sprint by 12%, and increases the movement speed bonus of sprint by 10%. Redguards start with the Wayfarer passive, which increases your experience gain with the One Hand and Shield skill line by 15%, and increases the duration of any eaten food items by 15 minutes. Then they have the Martial Training passive, which reduces the cost of your weapon abilities by 8%, and reduces the effectiveness of snares applied to you by 15%. The Conditioning passive increases your maximum stamina by 2,000. And for the Adrenaline Rush passive, when you deal damage, you restore 1,005 stamina. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. Argonians start with the Amphibian passive. This increases your experience gain with the Restoration Staff skill line by 15% and increases your swimming speed by 50%. The Life Mender passive increases your healing done by 6%. The Argonian Resistance passive increases your maximum health by 1,000 and your disease and poison resistance by 2310. And finally, the Resourceful passive increases your maximum magicka and stamina by 1,000. And also, when you drink a potion, you restore 3125 health, magicka, and stamina. Dark Elves start by unlocking the Ashlander passive. This increases your experience gain with the Dual Wield skill line by 15%, and it reduces your damage taken from environmental lava by 50%. The Dynamic passive increases your max magicka and max stamina by 1,910. The Resist Flame passive increases your flame resistance by 4620. And finally, Ruination increases your weapon and spell damage by 258. Nords start with the Reveler passive. This increases your experience gain with the Two-Handed skill line by 15% and increases the duration of any consumed drink item by 15 minutes. The Resist Frost passive increases your maximum health by 1,000 and frost resistance by 4620. The Stalwart passive increases your maximum stamina by 1,500, and when you take damage, you gain 5 ultimate. This effect can only occur once every 10 seconds. Finally, the Rugged passive increases your physical and spell resistance by 2,600. Finally, for the Imperial passives, they start with Diplomat. This increases your experience gained with the One Hand and Shield skill line by 15% and increases your gold gained by 1%. The Tough passive increases your maximum health by 2,000. The Imperial Metal passive increases your maximum stamina by 2,000. And Red Diamond reduces the cost of all of your abilities by 6%. Next up, you'll be picking your class, but remember that this does depend on the version of ESO that you purchased. ESO's most recent class, for example, called the Arcanist, that's only available to players that purchased the Necrom chapter that we mentioned earlier. That being said, though, I do want to give you an explanation of each class in the game because this will be the most important decision you make, at least in the short term. Why is that? Well, it's because while there are ways to change your faction and even change your race in ESO, once you pick your character's class, you cannot currently change it. That means if you make your main character a Nightblade or a Templar or a Warden, for example, that character is going to stay as that class forever. Now, I know that sounds intimidating at first, but there are a couple facts to keep in mind that make this decision a little bit easier, at least in my opinion. Fact number 1 is that every class can do every piece of content in this game. That includes solo content, group content, PvE, and PvP. That's because every class in ESO has its own set of skills for DPS, tanking, healing, survivability, utility, and so on. So, in other words, every class can be a DPS or be a tank or be a healer. They just do it with different skills and passives which are unique to that specific class. For example, the Dragon Knight class can deal damage with a Molten Whip or by summoning rocks or talons, while the Warden class deals damage by summoning animal companions and conjuring ice magic. Fact number 2 is that the Elder Scrolls Online has no shortage of character slots that you can use. Players start with 8 open character slots right away, which means you can technically create one character for each of the game's 7 classes if you want to experience them all. Through the Crown Store, you can then purchase up to 12 more character slots, giving you a total of 20 possible characters, meaning you can even have multiple versions of each class for different focuses and builds or specific purposes. For example, you could have one character just for questing, another character for dungeons, another character for trials, or for PvP content. You could have a character for crafting, or for roleplay or guild events, basically anything you can think of. Now, this is something that I really love about the Elder Scrolls Online because it gives you so much replayability, because when I get bored with one character, I can simply create a new one. So all that being said, yes, class is important, especially if you plan to play only one character, but the design of ESO definitely encourages you to try every class that you can. So let's do a quick review of each class, including their main skill lines, their themes, and how they play. If you want a more detailed guide, make sure to check out my updated class guide, which is also on YouTube. I'll put the link for that in the description. Starting with our base game classes, we have the Nightblade, one of ESO's most popular classes since its launch, thanks to its thematic characteristics of being a stealthy rogue or assassin type. Along those lines, Nightblades specialize in direct damage and escape tools like invisibility and teleportation, and they also have many unique skills which let them do well as tanks and even healers in group content. Now, in terms of solo gameplay, the Nightblade's ability to cloak with invisibility as well as teleport makes it a top class for surviving and surprising your enemies, especially in PvP, and you can even use that invisibility in some dungeons or overland content to just flat out avoid enemies or hunt down interesting locations and treasure chests. For skill lines, the Nightblades have the Assassination skill line. Just like it sounds, this is focused on damaging your target. With different offensive skills, we have teleports. We also have an Execute skill here, which ramps up damage the lower health your target gets. Then Nightblades have the Shadow skill line, which includes different utility-focused abilities, as well as some damage and healing. Here's where you have that Shadowy Disguise skill, which can turn your character invisible for a few seconds, and the Shadow Image skill, which lets you teleport away from your enemy. Finally, Nightblades have the Siphoning skill line, which is focused on blood magic and healing. For example, in the skill line, you have the powerful Swallow Soul skill, which damages your enemy and gives you a percentage back of that damage as healing. Next up, we have the Dragonite class. This is ESO's version of an in-your-face melee brawler with a theme centered around, you guessed it, fighting like a dragon. So whether you're applying some deadly poison or flame attacks to your enemies, throwing boulders, or flying through the air with dragon's wings, the DK can utilize a visceral style of combat that's both effective and pretty fun to play. In terms of skill lines, DKs have the Ardent Flame skill line. This harnesses the power of fire or sometimes poison to deal damage, debuff enemies, and even heal yourself or allies. Then you have the Draconic Power skill line that unlocks some amazing and unique dragon-themed abilities. For example, you have Spiked Armor to increase your defense, Burning Talons to immobilize your enemies, Dragonfire Scales to absorb damage, and finally the Earthen Heart skill line is a great option for tanks, healers, and even damage dealers, though especially for tanks as you can shield yourself and even your group with skills like Igni Shield or the Magma Shell Ultimate. The theme of the Templar class centers around bringing the power of the sun to the battlefield, whether that's for offense or defense. Templars also excel at both self-healing and group healing, and remain one of the strongest classes in the game since its launch due to their strong healing potential. In PvE groups, Templar healers will often be highly desirable for their strong burst healing and their ability to restore resources to the group, while PvP Templars still remain one of the most difficult classes to defeat due to their strong defensive buffs, constant self-healing, and their ability to cleanse enemy negative effects from themselves and their group. Templars have the Adric Spear skill line where you'll find most of their offensive abilities, including Puncturing Sweep, a channeled spear attack that does multiple hits while also healing you at the same time. Then there's the Dawn's Wrath skill line, which has Vampire's Bane, one of the longest lasting damage over time skills in the game. Templars also have an amazing execute here called Radiant Oppression, which does massive damage. Finally, Templars do have a very strong healing skill line called Restoring Light, which, as I mentioned earlier, makes them pretty much easy mode for any healing that you need in the game. But that brings us to the Sorcerer class, essentially the classic caster type, but with a unique Elder Scrolls twist. Sorcerers in ESO are connected with elemental damage, specifically lightning damage, but also have access to some darker magic types, including Daedric summoning, basically calling on creatures from other planes of existence. First, the Sorcerer's Dark Magic skill line offers a lot in terms of damage and utility. For example, the Crystal Fragments morph can do big bursts of damage, or you can choose the Crystal Weapon morph, which causes your light and heavy attacks to do bonus damage and reduce enemy armor. Then there is the Storm Calling skill line, which utilizes that lightning or shock-based magic that we talked about earlier. Skills like Mage's Wrath and Lightning Flood will do strong lightning-based damage. Plus the skill Critical Surge is one of the best passive heals in the game, especially great for solo builds. This heals you back when you do critical damage to any target. Finally, that Daedric summoning skill line does focus on pets, letting you summon Daedric Scamps, Twilights, Clan Fears, and even the Storm Atronach Ultimate, which is pretty impressive. But that rounds out the 4 base game classes. Now let's move on to some of the DLC class offerings next, starting with the Warden class, which originated with the Morrowind chapter expansion. Wardens are defenders of nature that can summon animal companions, as well as cast powerful ice spells that debuff enemies or empower themselves or their group. Wardens have strong healing plus a lot of burst damage potential, making this a great class if you're interested in PvP or even a bit of solo PvE. First off, that Animal Companion skill line allows the Warden to summon Cliff Racers, Shocks, and even Fetcherflies to damage their opponents. With direct damage, timed burst damage, plus dots, many of these skills also provide secondary debuffs, like reducing your enemy's armor, or making them take more damage from your attacks, which is really good. Then there's the Winter's Embrace skill line, which is a little bit more focused on tanking, and also some damaging frost effects. And finally, the Green Balance skill line focuses primarily on healing both the Warden and their group by summoning healing vines, flowers, and trees, so more of a nature focus. Another DLC class would be the Necromancer, which originated with the Elsewhere chapter. Obviously, Necromancers in ESO are the masters of the dead, though playing a Necromancer can be a bit more challenging than some other classes in the Elder Scrolls Online. One big reason for that is that necromancy is still frowned upon in most major cities. That's because if a guard sees you raising up a corpse or casting any of your deathly buffs, they will immediately hunt you down and attempt to kill you. And don't worry, you can always run away and your bounty or your threat level will slowly go down to where you can enter town again, but you just need to be a little bit more careful on the Necromancer class. Necromancers have the Gravelord skill line, focused primarily on DPS, summoning skeletal mages and archers and other minions to do damage for you. Then they have the Bone Tyrant skill line, focused primarily on tanking, damage absorption, allowing you to cast protective spells like Beckoning Armor, which is an armor buff but also pulls in enemies to you, which can be really helpful for crowd control. Finally, the Living Death skill line focuses on the Necromancer's healing abilities. They are actually pretty interesting healers as well. Some skills like Render Flesh allow you to heal yourself and your allies at the expense of your own health regeneration. Finally, the 7th class for the Elder Scrolls Online is the new Arcanist class. This came out with the Necrom chapter. The theme of the Arcanist centers around the Daedric Prince Hermaeus Mora, Lord of Fate and Forbidden Knowledge, and the class incorporates a lot of those aesthetics, Mora's black books, runes of power, abyssal ink, and tentacles, just to name a few examples. Many Arcanist skills also have a bright neon effect, which creates a pretty compelling visual presence on the battlefield, and it makes this class stand out strongly from every other class in the game. Arcanists also have a unique mechanic that no other class has called Crux. You basically build up stacks of Crux by casting certain abilities, and then when you're at your full stacks, that actually empowers other abilities to do things like deal more damage or create stronger healing or damage shields. So while the Arcanist class is actually very good for beginners because of how powerful it is, it's also a lot of fun to master and get better at over time. Herald of the Tome is the Arcanist DPS skill line. There is an ultra powerful skill here called Fate Carver. It is essentially a beam that you channel in front of you that again can be empowered with Crux to do even more damage. There's even a damage shield morph of that, which is great for solo builds. But Arcanists also have the Soldier of Apocrypha skill line focused more on tanking. It's going to give you some new opportunities for possibly unique tank builds. You can also gain massive shields with the Impervious Rune Ward skill, great for PvE and for PvP. Plus you have access to some very powerful debuffs in this skill line as well. Finally, the healing skill line called Curative Rune Forms gives Arcanists another beam ability, but this one heals you and your allies. Very powerful as well. Plus, Arcanists also have a group damage shield called Chakram of Destiny, and skills like Arcanist Domain offer some unique and powerful buffs and healing over time effects. So that covers all 7 classes currently in the Elder Scrolls Online. I hope that gives you some better ideas of what each class is about. I really wanted to give you some examples and a bit of a showcase with the gameplay to make your decision a little bit easier. I know it is a big decision, so if you have any questions, I also recommend just watching some more of my videos on the channel where I go over different builds for each class. This will also give you a good idea in more detail of how the class sort of feels and plays. You can check those out on my website as well. That's hacktheminotaur.com. Just go to the builds section and click on class builds to see a ton of examples. All right, so now that you've decided your race, you've also picked your class for your starting character, you can finally finish your character creation process by finalizing your body type and your face. So on this 3rd tab, we have the body type, different sliders. There is also this triangle where you can sort of customize your overall body structure, I guess. So more muscular or large or thin. That's kind of going to give you an overview for the character. You then have the height slider underneath that. And then underneath that is all the customized sliders for upper body, lower body, and so on. So under the upper body options, you have torso size, chest size, gut size, waist, arm, and hands. Under lower body, you have the hip size, posterior dimensions, legs, and feet. So pretty much everything there in terms of the overall body dimensions that you'd want to customize are in that third tab. There is a randomize appearance option as well. Some of these can get a little bit crazy, but you can experiment with that also if you like. And then the final tab here is specifically for the face. So you'll see it has another one of those triangle sliders. The options here are heroic, angular, and soft. That's just kind of giving you a general overview of the face structure. And then you can customize it down here more with the sliders. You also have an option to pick your voice. Now, ESO does not have a voice actor specifically for your character with like voiced dialogue lines. All the NPCs have voice dialogue, but your voice is typically just for combat sounds, things like getting hit, taking damage, doing an ultimate cast, breaking free from crowd control. Those types of things are what your voice is used for. So you have the different options here, and you can test them out if you want. And down below we have a slider for different hairstyles. So some of the options you can see are right here. Hair color is going to let you change your hair color, obviously. The age feature basically ages your face, so it's going to apply some wrinkles and markings. Adornments is going to give you things like different beard options, mustaches, and so on. Head markings, this will be things like scars, tattoos, facial marks, things like that. And then you have the further customization options for the face. So you've got forehead, cheekbones, jaw, chin, neck sizes. Then you have customization of the eyes as well. So different eye colors you can apply, as well as changing your eye size, the angle, separation, height, and even squint. Eyebrows can be customized, your nose can be customized, mouth, and ears. So a lot of great options here. You can spend tons of time with the finer details of customizing your character. Don't forget you've got the randomize option here as well. And to get into game, all you're going to do is click on the create button. Now, ESO does have a pretty good tutorial. I definitely recommend it if you've never played the game. Of course, if you have played before, you will have the option to skip it. But the tutorial is very helpful for new players. The tutorial starts you off in a zone called the Isle of Balfira. Something to keep in mind is that once you leave the tutorial area, you cannot come back. But in typical Elder Scrolls fashion, you do start out as a prisoner, but just speak to the NPC that approaches you and you'll be able to get out of that jail cell pretty quickly. Now, from there, you'll actually be able to choose your first weapon, though I actually recommend picking up all the options for weapons so that you can try them all out on your own. That includes the Restoration Staff, Destruction Staff. Then you have the bow, you have dual wield, in this case 2 daggers. You have two-handed weapons, in this case the Great Axe. And then finally the sword and shield, though technically you can use any one-handed weapon like a dagger or mace with a shield. Like I said, you can get all these weapons at the beginning for free, so you can try them out. For this character, I'm going to go with a nice basic ranged option, in this case the Destruction Staff. So next up, you'll get a bit of a combat tutorial, and this is going to go over the basics, starting with your basic attacks, also called light attacks. You'll mix these in with blocking your enemy's heavy charged attack. That's whenever the enemy has these white lines emanating from them. You need to block that, otherwise you're going to get knocked down and hit for some big damage. From there, you're also going to learn the heavy attack. Heavy attacks are simply where you charge your weapon, by the way, so you hold down that trigger or the left mouse button for a little bit longer. It'll automatically fire when it's fully charged. It'll do a little bit more damage. If an enemy is off balance and you hit them with a heavy attack, that also knocks down that enemy. Plus, there's some other mechanics we'll learn about later. Finally, you'll learn how to break free from crowd control. This is useful because some stuns in the Elder Scrolls Online can last a while, like 3 to 4 seconds. And so you want to actually break free, and that'll get you out of that crowd control effect immediately. Other basic mechanics, you'll learn about Skyshards. You can collect Skyshards out in the world, and 3 of those combined is going to equal 1 skill point. There's also other ways to get skill points, which we'll talk about. You will get some loot for the tutorial. Make sure to unlock your container. Get some basic armor. These have a very good trait called training, by the way. You can see this increases your experience gained from kills by 7%. So basically, this is going to help you level up faster the more gear pieces you have with this training trait. Also, don't forget to equip any jewelry that you come across. In most cases, this will have bonus stats, either bonus health, magicka, or stamina, which is useful when you're starting. It may also have a glyph, like increased damage or increased recovery, which is even better. Now, you will level up during the process of the tutorial as well. You'll probably go from level 1 to level 3. And each time you level up in ESO, you do get some level up rewards. Of course, you do get skill points and attribute points. That's every time you level up. But in addition, you might get some food, some basic items, things like that. And these can also be very useful. So make sure to claim your rewards, place your attribute points. Basic rule of thumb is you want to put points into magicka if you're using magic-based weapons. That's restoration staff or destruction staff, and then put your points into stamina if you're using stamina-based weapons, all the other melee weapons, obviously, and the bow. With those early skill points, I simply recommend picking the first skill from each of your 3 class skill lines. That will give you a nice basic skill bar to start with, and you're leveling up all your skill lines equally. Now, the final thing you can do as you're finishing the tutorial is you can actually pick your starting zone where you want to go next. This is going to give you brief overview of the story for that zone or that chapter DLC. Choose that option and it'll automatically teleport you to that zone. Obviously, this will depend on the chapters that you purchased earlier. You can only access those that you've already bought, but there are also basic starting zones that come with the base game that I actually recommend more than anything else. So those sort of classic starting zones are going to be Bleak Rock Isle, Stros Mackay. Then the other one, my favorite actually, is Canarthy's Roost. Now, the reason why I recommend you pick one of the 3 starting areas from the base game is that they are much smaller than chapter zones, and also they are much easier to survive in. Chapter zones are huge. They also include some powerful world bosses and world events that can easily kill you in just a couple seconds, whereas these 3 starter zones, again, much smaller. No world bosses, no world events that will kill you. So with this character, I'm going to select Canarthy's Roost, and I can do this zone and gain easily another 4 to 5 levels before I move on to one of the bigger chapter zones or base game zones. So now that you've completed the tutorial as a brand new player, or you've skipped past it, if you've played the game before, you should be in your starting zone of choice. Again, I am in Canarthy's Roost, which is one of my favorites. Now, I want to point out that once you arrive in this starting zone, you are not locked into completing the story if you don't want to, or if you get bored and you just want to try something else. Basically, any DLC content that you've purchased, whether it's story zones or chapter expansions, or you bought the ESO Plus subscription, which almost unlocks everything. We'll talk about ESO Plus in a few minutes. All of your other zones and content is accessible through the map. So let's go ahead and jump into the world map view next. Here's my starting zone, Canarthy's Roost. But if I zoom out a little bit, you can see I have access to the entire map of Tamriel. Now, the main way of traveling through these different zones is through the Wayshrines. Here's the Wayshrine icon. And again, if we zoom out, we can see several zones that also have this Wayshrine icon, and that means I can travel to these right away. And all of these pretty much are different stories and chapter expansions that you can get access to. So right here to the north of Canarthy's Roost, we've got the Elsewhere chapter and expansions right here. Moving around sort of counterclockwise, we have Blackwood, so this would be the Blackwood chapter. And most of the Wayshrines will put you right next to like starting city for that specific zone or chapter expansion. So again, there's Blackwood. Let's keep moving around. Here is Murkmire. Murkmire is a story zone. Then moving up, here is Telvanni Peninsula. So this is connected to the Necrom chapter expansion. Moving further up, here is the zone of Vardenfell. That is the Morrowind chapter. Keep moving around. Over here we have Western Skyrim. This is going to be the Greymoor chapter expansion. Then we have the Reach. This is a story zone connected to the Greymoor chapter. Then we have the zone of Orsinium. This is for the Hrothgar chapter. Moving around, we have Hughesbane. I believe this is the Thieves Guild DLC. Further down, you also have the Gold Coast. This is the Dark Brotherhood DLC. Moving a bit further out, we have High Isle, so the High Isle chapter and the Zone of Galen. And then we even have Somerset. So this is where the Somerset chapter takes place. And I'm sure I probably missed a few in here, but all of those stories and chapters and DLCs are going to be accessible, again, depending upon what you purchased. And you can see this is really just the start because we have so many other story zones that you can access to as well as soon as you finish the tutorial, the base game tutorial. So these would be like the base game story zones, depending on your alliance. So remember, I am a High Elf. So I'm starting with the Aldemary Dominion faction. So I'm going to go from Canarthy's Roost into the zone of Grotwood, and then Greenshade, Malleable Tor, and Reaper's March. Over here, you have the Daggerfall Covenant Alliance. So those zones are Glenumbra, Rivenspire, Stormhaven, Bankerai, Alakir Desert. Then you have your Ebonheart Pact zones over on this side of the map. So that'll be Stonefalls, Deshaun, Shadowfen, the Rift, and Eastmarch. Cyrodiil, obviously the PvP zone, and Imperial City. Those are going to be right in the middle. Even zooming out even further, you have the Orbis, or essentially different Daedric planes and other interesting places you can go to. Apocrypha, for example, this is going to be accessible through the Necrom chapter. You have Cold Harbor, which is part of the base game story. Clockwork City, which is a separate DLC you can gain access to. Fargrave and the Deadlands, those are going to be connected to the Deadlands story. And then here is Artaeum, which is part of Somerset. So all that to say, there are tons of zones and stories for you to explore. So that being said, let's go ahead and start the story of Canarthy's Roost. And I'm going to use my compass at the top of the screen to head to a nearby quest marker. This one is special because this indicates a zone story. So it's a bigger sort of overarching story for the entire zone. I'm going to talk to this NPC named Razumdar. You're going to get to know him a lot with the Aldemary Dominion story especially. And he's going to introduce me to what's going on in the zone. Like I said, sort of the overall story of what's taking place and how I can take part in that adventure. As I talk to him and complete his dialogue, the quest marker is going to move. It stays white to highlight that this is my current main quest that I'm on. And so I just go to the next NPC and talk to them. Obviously, sometimes you'll be doing different things. Maybe you'll be fighting monsters or looking for treasure or traveling to a completely different city in that zone just to continue the story. Now, like I said, you can track this quest as it moves around the zone using the compass that's at the top of your screen. Or if, again, you were to go into that world map view, you can see how the quest marker moves around there in order to get to the next location. Now, also, you don't have to do the main story quest for that zone that you're in. You can decide to just wander around and then do any side quests that pop up as well. You can see these have a different icon, a little bit smaller on my compass and my world map. This is grayed out because it's not my active quest yet. But if I speak to this NPC, I can learn more about this side quest. So pretty straightforward. If I go through the dialogue, I then get the instructions to complete this side quest. And if I want to see where that is, I can open up my map again. Here's the side quest. And then over here is that main story quest. You can see the marker that is completely in white is my active quest. And I can just click on each one to say which quest I want active. I can also change my active quest in the UI here in the top right. That's really just for map marking. It doesn't really affect how you complete the quest at all. But I do recommend that you complete quests in ESO as much as possible, whether it's side quests or the main story quest, just do them all. This is especially helpful as a new player. Not only do these quests give you a lot of great stories and background information and lore about what's happening in the world of the Elder Scrolls Online, but they also give you lots of items you can actually use, like set pieces, and especially a lot of experience to help you level up. For this side quest, for example, this probably took me less than 5 minutes to complete, and I got over 1,000 experience, helping me level up, which is awesome. How else can you level up? Well, another way, obviously, is just killing enemies. The more enemies you kill, the faster you do that, the more experience you're going to get. But enemies like this, especially in the starting zones, are not great for experience. They'll give you a little bit here and there, but definitely not as much as doing those quests. Another way to easily level up is to simply uncover new locations. As you discover those, they will appear then on your map. You'll also get a little bit of experience for each one. So what kind of locations can you discover? Well, for our starting zones, it's pretty basic. You'll find some small towns, maybe with a handful of vendors where you can buy and sell, or you might find some nearby caves or bandit camps or a wrecked ship on the shoreline. And all of these will have their own types of enemies, or mobs as they're sometimes called, so you'll get more experience for killing those and discovering those locations on your map. Plus, of course, you'll discover plenty more side quests to help you level up even faster. Now, we mentioned Skyshards previously in the tutorial, but now you'll actually be able to find many more of these out in the world. Remember that every 3 Skyshards you discover and use will unlock 1 new skill point for your character. Also, a good thing to know is that when a Skyshard is nearby, it will appear on both your map and your compass so that it's easier to find. Now, as you roam around the zone, you'll also come across resources to harvest for crafting skills like blacksmithing, woodworking, clothing, and so on. We'll discuss crafting later on in this video, but for now, I do recommend you get used to harvesting resources and what the different node types look like so that you can take full advantage of the crafting system later on if you want to. Treasure chests are another thing I highly recommend you look for, especially in your starting zone. These will give you items, gold, and a bit of experience for unlocking, but in ESO's starting zones, you also have a high chance of getting a unique set that only drops in those starting areas called Armor of the Trainee. And most likely this will be your first chance at getting an item set in ESO. And the way that sets work is that they give you stacking bonuses based on how many items you've equipped from that set. Now, it might not seem like much at first, but any extra stats you can get at this point is definitely helpful. And yes, you will need lockpicks, but you should have gotten some of those from the tutorial, and you can also purchase those from basic vendors. By the way, the different rarities or difficulties of chests affect the quality and the amount of loot inside the chest, plus it also makes that timer tick a little bit faster. So the advanced and master level chests are the most difficult to unlock, but you can still do this on a basic character without any additional skills or passives. Now, you'll probably come across some consumable items like food or drink and potions, and you can also start using these right away. In fact, you probably got a food item from your level up rewards, so make sure to use that to take advantage of the bonus stats it gives you. These can be found in your inventory under the slotted items area, by the way, and food and drink in this game actually makes a huge difference and will make your character abilities do more damage or even heal for more health because all of that scales off of your max stats. You can also get things like experience scrolls which help you level up faster. You should use those as well. And potions are also a very big part of ESO, especially as you get into more difficult content, as these can give you a quick burst of stats like magicka, stamina, or health. You can also slot these onto your quick slot menu to use them easier in combat. And finally, you should discover some additional Wayshrines to help you travel around the starter zone faster. So let me explain how that works next, because the way ESO handles Wayshrines and fast travel is actually a bit confusing. First, you can travel to any discovered Wayshrine in the game completely for free by simply approaching another Wayshrine and tapping the use key. This will then open up your map, and if you move your map to another Wayshrine, you can click on it and fast travel there for free. Now, the other way to fast travel does cost gold, and this is where you start the fast travel option without using a Wayshrine first, so starting from any other location. So if I come over here, for example, and just open my map by itself, again, not touching any Wayshrines, I can still move my cursor to any Wayshrine I've already discovered and attempt to travel there, but now it costs me gold instead of being free. I also have this casting animation, which takes some time and can also be interrupted by enemies, by the way. So you can see that basically you're paying for convenience with ESO Wayshrines. If you want to travel for free, just make sure to start at the Wayshrine first. But if you're out in the wilds of the zone anywhere, you can still fast travel, it just costs gold and takes more time. Now here's the weirder thing, the amount of gold that you have to spend does depend on your level as well as time. So here on my max level character, it costs a minimum of 146 gold for a fast travel, again if I'm not starting from a Wayshrine. The other really important fact here is that your next travel that you do, again, not using a Wayshrine at the start, is going to cost way more gold. You can see this is now over 1,000 gold, but this increase is actually time-based. As I wait, the cost of gold is going down over time. Now, after a few minutes, the cost is then going to reset back to that baseline cost of 146 gold for this max level character. So 2 rules of thumb to keep in mind here. Number 1, obviously try to travel between Wayshrines whenever possible by starting from a Wayshrine first because that is free. And number 2, if you're not near a Wayshrine, try to wait for your gold cost to go back down to its minimum before fast traveling again to save more gold. So by now you're probably getting quite good at the starting zone and have leveled up quite a bit, so let's talk more about those attributes and skills. Now in terms of attributes, ESO provides 64 total attribute points you can use on your character, so you get a few of these basically every level. Now as I mentioned before, during the tutorial, you generally want to place those attribute points into 2 options. All Magicka if your build is going to be focused on magic costing abilities, like those that come from the Destruction Staff, or all Stamina if your build will be more focused on stamina costing skills, like those that come from the melee weapons or from the bow. This simply means that you can cast more of those Magicka or stamina costing skills before you run out of that resource. These max resources or max stats also increase your total damage and healing, as I mentioned before, just like when we used that buff food from earlier. Now, health is more of a survival resource, and you'll definitely want to use it on your build if you plan on being a tank for group content, participating in PvP content, or doing some tougher solo content like the Infinite Archive. So there's a place for health too, but it's not typically needed when you're just starting out. So again, what I recommend, go full Magicka or full Stamina for your attributes depending on the types of weapons and skills you'd like to focus on. And don't worry, because we can always change or respec our attributes later, and I will show you how to do that in a little while. But on next to skills, and as you can see here, I've leveled up quite a bit in the starter zone because I now have 9 skill points I can spend. This came from a combination of leveling up and Skyshards, by the way, and I've been saving all of these up just to show you the different options here. So first you want to unlock the first skill in each of your class skill lines. So on my Warden, I have Animal Companions, I got the Dive skill, then I have Green Balance where I got Fungal Growth, and Winter's Embrace where I picked up Frost Cloak. You can see I have all 3 skills on my active skill bar, and my skills are going to level up over time or gain in ranks as I earn experience from doing quests, from killing enemies, and from exploring. You can see actually each of these skills is already at rank 4, which means I can now spend another skill point on it to unlock a skill morph option. So morphs define the skill with more effects and also sometimes change the cost from Magicka to Stamina or vice versa. Here you can see Cutting Dive changes the skill to cost Stamina and now deals bleed damage, while the Screaming Cliff Racer morph keeps it as a Magicka costing skill but also increases my weapon and spell damage when I use the ability. Now in terms of what to pick, remember that I'm using an Inferno Staff which has all Magicka abilities. I also put all of my attribute points into Magicka, so the Magicka morph here really makes the most sense. It's going to be easiest for me to maintain with my Magicka resource pool, plus it's going to give me a nice bonus to weapon and spell damage whenever I use it. Now that's not to say that you never want to pick up another morph that costs Stamina. Sometimes we'll do that as well if a Stamina skill has a specific effect or buff that we want for our character. Now we can choose to morph the rest of our skills or just wait. I actually think I'm going to save my skill point on Fungal Growth and not morph that one because I'm not really playing as a healer yet, so I'm not going to need that specialization. But I will morph Frost Cloak because this gives me a nice bonus effect called Minor Protection, which reduces my damage taken, so I'm going to pick up Ice Fortress here as my morph. Now next, I also have some new skills available to unlock in these class skill lines, and this just happens over the course of the game as you level up and gain experience. Your skill lines level up as well if you have skills from that skill line slotted. This is exactly why you should have something from all 3 of your class skill lines equipped at the same time to make sure you're leveling up all 3 of those skill lines equally. But now I can unlock the Scorch ability, which is another damaging effect. And what I can do here is replace Cliff Racer because I already morphed it, put my new Scorch skill here so that I can then rank up that new skill to rank 4 and eventually morph that next. And then I'm going to replace Fungal Growth with Healing Seed to level up that new skill. I also want to level up a new skill from Winter's Embrace, so I'll replace Ice Fortress with Impaling Shards, But don't worry, I am going to use Ice Fortress again later. That's probably going to end up on my backup skill bar once I unlock that. But keep in mind, you can also pick skills for your main weapon, in this case the Destruction Staff for this character. And there's 2 very good skills here that I want to start leveling up as well. So I will also grab Force Shock and Wall of Elements to complete my skill bar and have my 5 regular abilities good to go. Now I do have light armor available as well, as you can see here in my skill lines. That's because I had actually equipped 3 pieces of light armor previously, legs, hands, and a chest piece. So basically, equipping 3 pieces of the same armor weight will unlock that armor skill line. So I'll need to do this for eventually medium and heavy armor as well. But you can see there is just 1 skill I can eventually get for light armor, plus some really great passives which I can put skill points into. These reduce my skill cost or give bonus recovery and so on, so those are great to get eventually as well. Finally, make sure you check out your racial skill line here. As you level up, you'll be able to put more points into your racial passives, which give you even more power, like bonus magicka, bonus stamina, or extra weapon and spell damage. So it's important to save your skill points for these passives, as well as your class passives here. You want to get all of these very soon because they just make your character much more powerful. So I've leveled up a bit more, and now we can talk about ultimate abilities. As you can see, now that I've reached rank 12 for Animal Companions, I can now purchase my ultimate ability in this skill line called Feral Guardian. Now, since I had 1 skill from each skill line slotted, while I was earning experience, I could also unlock ultimates in my other class skill lines if I preferred, but I think the best one for this build right now will be that Feral Guardian Bear Pet ultimate, so I'm going to start with that. You can see that ultimates require your ultimate resource to be built up over time, and you can charge this up during combat. I'll show you how that works in just a minute. But I have more skill points here, so I can also morph the Scorch skill and take Deep Fissure. This is going to give me some nice debuffs called Major and Minor Breach. These actually reduce my enemy's armor, letting my attacks and others' attacks do more damage against those enemies, which is great. And I always want to unlock more passives. Remember that these are super important to make your build more powerful. So Bond with Nature actually gives me a heal when I use any animal companion skill. This is going to be great. I can also go down to my light armor passives and boost my magicka recovery and my magicka cost reduction of skills here. Those are also very helpful passives to get. So how do you charge up that ultimate meter? Well, as you can see, my skills and abilities don't seem to be doing anything. I'm casting spells and my ultimate does not go up. That's because the best way to charge your ultimate is actually a basic light attack. Now, as soon as I light attack, my ultimate starts to climb. That's because your light attacks give you an invisible buff in ESO, which grants you 3 ultimate every second for 9 seconds, just from light attacking 1 time. Here again, you can see that skills add nothing, but just 1 light attack is all I need, and I start to gain that ultimate even after the enemy has died. Again, it's 9 seconds of ultimate generation. Same thing works for heavy attacks, by the way. This will give you the same ultimate generation. And now that I'm actually over my 75 ultimate base cost for the bear pet, the icon gets highlighted and now I can use it. Now you may be asking, where do you get those ultimate numbers to show up? And that's all in the game settings, which we'll cover next. So I'm not going to bother with video and audio. I'm going to assume you're going to do what's best for you in terms of whatever system you're using. Again, PC, Mac, console, whatever. We're going to jump right into gameplay settings and highlight some important things you should be doing. Number 1, combat cues. These should be on. This is basically the glowing areas on the ground around you that highlight either some beneficial, like friendly effects, or some enemy AoEs that you want to avoid. Both of these are completely customizable. For friendly effects, I have mine green. For enemy effects, I have mine purple. Once you select these, you should be able to change, what other color you want, and then you can also test these out. Brightness is also customizable as well. Double tap to dodge, that's going to be on PCs and Mac only. I have it on, but I don't typically use it. I prefer to have a dedicated button for dodge, and of course this doesn't affect consoles at all because you will be combining buttons to dodge on console. Another great option is prevent attacking innocents. Make sure this is on as well so you don't accidentally attack a guard or a merchant or something like that. Now, a very important setting that you need to enable both for PCs and consoles is quick cast ground abilities. This was really frustrating to me before I figured it out. So basically a ground ability would be something like Endless Hail, where it has a targeted effect that you can aim on the ground. Now the default for this setting is automatic, which sounds good, but it's actually not that great because it means you have to click twice, once to enable the skill and aim it, and the second time to fire off the ability. That's really a huge waste of time. So you want to make sure this is set to on. Again, quick cast ground abilities, you want that on for sure. Now, a lot more time savers are here in the items section. I do recommend you consolidate area loot. This just basically means that when you loot one corpse, it will automatically check all of the corpses in the area and put all of that loot into one window, which then you can choose from. Now, on top of that, I do typically switch on auto loot. So that saves me another click. It's going to put all of those items automatically into my inventory as soon as I click on the corpse. Now, you do have some other nice effects you can put on here. So prevent stealing. This is so helpful, you guys. I can't count how many times I've been clicking on like a merchant or a vendor in a town, trying to open up the trading window, and I accidentally steal something on the shelf behind them. Turn this on. You won't have to deal with that anymore. Craft bag should be on if you're an ESO Plus member. And then you have some options for hiding things on your character and on your mount. Not a huge deal, so you can choose what to do there. So that covers our gameplay settings. Another major area that I want to show you guys is the combat section, particularly the display, the combat text, the buffs. That's where you can update how all of that stuff looks. So for the default settings, I really don't like these. If I go out of my settings, you can see basically it doesn't show me anything. So while this is a little bit nicer for like roaming around, taking screenshots, videos, and what have you, this is not that great for combat. It doesn't show me where my skills are, what they are. It doesn't even show me my health and my resources, right? So this is pretty terrible. What we want to make sure is that we have all of these turned on. So under combat in the heads-up display, instead of all of these being automatic, you're going to change them to always show. So our ability bar, always show. That means my skills will always be visible, whether I'm in combat or not. Same thing with my attribute bars, always show. And resource numbers, I do have this on as number and percent. Of course, that's up to you if you prefer one or the other, but I like to see both. Active combat tips, I usually leave this as automatic. And then ultimate number, I definitely want that on. So now I can show you just a quick comparison with what we saw earlier. You can see now I have all my attribute bars, all my skills are visible. All right, combat text. ESO does have its own combat text system built into the game. You don't need any add-ons for this, and it is quite good. I would recommend turning on most of these, if not all of them, just to show you as much information as possible. Of course, it's up to you. You can turn these off if you think your screen is too crowded. Now, the other thing that I like is ESO's default buff timers. Now, no, it's not quite as fancy as some of the add-ons that are available out there for PC. But again, this feature works without any add-ons, so it's available for consoles as well. And it's actually pretty good, I think. So under buffs and debuffs, you're going to want to make this always show. This will turn on most of these. The only one that's usually off by default is debuffs from others. I usually just turn that on as well. Okay, so now that I have my preferred settings in place, just to kind of showcase what the game actually looks like, you can see I'm not in combat yet, but I still have my ability bar. I have all my skills showing. I have my ultimate number, which is going to be important to see when your ultimate is ready. I also have my buff timers, and I have my actual health and stamina and magicka numbers over the bar. So yeah, this is a good setup in my opinion. Very clean, very easy to tell what's going on with your skills, your buffs, your resources. There's that auto loot function, by the way. Do a little bit more combat here so you can see it. Now, so this is the gamepad mode is what it's called. So this is how your game will look on console, either PlayStation or Xbox with those settings. Though I am actually playing on PC right now. So just to show you the difference, if I were to turn off gamepad mode, this is how those same settings look on PC. So not too bad, pretty clean, I think. I do like how this looks on PC as well. The only difference really is you'll be using the keyboard and mouse. You'll be using the number button for your skills. You'll be using the left click for your light attack. But it's still a very clean look. So you could just do this setup as well. Like I said, if you're on PC, pretty easy to use also. The main difference really with PC is just sort of the menu UIs, like the inventory and stuff. This does look a little bit different in how it works on PC. Versus on console, the inventory and the menu UIs are very scroll-based, so you do a lot of scrolling here. That would be the main difference. But I've now completed the starting zone for the most part of Khenarthi's Roost, just to kind of show you my progress so far, basically. You can see I completed the main story quest of the zone. I've done a lot of this side quest content, discovered most of the points of interest, the Wayshrines, the different locations. I did upgrade my gear quite a bit. For example, I have 2 out of the 3 set pieces for that Armor of the Trainee set. I could even get a 3rd set piece if I wanted to stay and farm the zone a little bit more, maybe find some more treasure chests. I could pick that up very easily. I just got this from some of the quests. This was actually a reward from the main story quest in the zone. I have most of my other armor pieces. I'm just really missing the helmet right now. Remember to focus on those training pieces. If you get pieces with a training trait, that would be your priority. So even though this is a level 5 piece and I'm currently level 12, I'm still wearing it because I get 7% bonus experience just for wearing that. I even have a level 3 training piece from the tutorial. But yeah, the level of your gear really is not important until you reach endgame. So you can see I have all different levels of gear, all the way from level 3 up to my weapon here, level 9. This comes from the level up rewards. The Prophet's Inferno Staff, you get the option of picking a weapon at level 9, and this deals bonus Oblivion damage. It also has the training trait, so I get more experience, and I get some maximum health. Picked up some decent jewelry as well. I've got the trainee necklace, so that's helping me with those set piece bonuses. It also gives me Magicka recovery and max Magicka, which is really good for my Magicka focused warden. And then this just comes from the tutorial quest. But yeah, very happy with the progress of this character overall. I was showcasing the skills earlier. These are also looking very good. I have a mix of class skills and destruction staff skills. I have my ultimate, currently working on leveling that up. Remember that I've picked up some passives here as well for my class. I also have light armor passives, and I have some of those racial passives as well. This is going to help with my sustain and also increase my max Magicka. You, of course, can move much faster than that. I just kind of wanted to showcase what your character would look like had you done everything in the starter zone. But at this point, once you've completed the story, you'll get the option to move on to the main zone of Auradon, and obviously this is going to depend on which starting zone you chose in the tutorial. But Auradon, it would be where we go for the Aldmeri Dominion storyline. If you followed the story through Khenarthi's Roost, it very obviously takes you on to Auradon, and this is going to be our first major overland zone. You can see it's a much bigger. Here's Khenarthi's Roost, here's Auradon, and if I show you the map, this is probably like the size of Khenarthi's Roost right here, this small little area, and then we have all of this to explore. And this is just the first out of 5 Aldmeri Dominion zones that you're going to have access to in the base game. So there's tons and tons we can do here as well. But here's the main city, Volkelgard. We'll talk about exploring this next. But before we get there, we actually have an NPC that I do recommend you talk to. The hooded figure is going to get you started on the main story quest for the Elder Scrolls Online, the base game story.
Greetings. My benefactor wishes to speak to you about a matter that could affect the fate of our world.
And wouldn't you know it, we are stuck in prison again. So obviously I fast forwarded a little bit. I don't want to spoil too much of this main story quest, but it does take you to a new zone called Cold Harbor, and you're going to be following this NPC named Lyris to try to find a way out. Interesting, this is actually the original base game tutorial as well. So you may see a few of those tutorial elements sort of left over. That's just something to keep in mind, but it is now the main story mission for the entire base game. It will introduce you to some pretty important characters, and so I highly recommend that you go through the entire quest line. After you go through the first main story mission, you'll be greeted with the Prophet, and he shows up nearly every time you return to your main Alliance city. In this case, I am in Volkelgard for the Aldmeri Dominion faction, as we saw earlier. And when the Prophet appears again next, he'll give you a new objective to complete in this quest chain. Each time you'll also return to the Harborage. This is located very close to that main Alliance city, and this is where you'll learn more about the main story of ESO and make plans with its primary characters to deal with the incoming threats to Tamriel. Now, you don't have to do these main story missions all right away or at the same time, but I do recommend you complete them before you hit at least level 50. But for one thing, they really help to explain what's going on in the world, so when you come across your first dolmen, for example, you know exactly why it's there and what it means in terms of the story. But the main quest for ESO is also extremely helpful for leveling up, because not only will you get a big chunk of experience for each step in the quest chain that you complete, you also get one full skill point for each step as well. Now, you can use these extra skill points to really flesh out your character, to unlock things like passive skills, which you wouldn't have had enough skill points to unlock without. So doing these missions is a great way to set up your character for success further on in the game. All right, so let's head back to our main city. In this case, again, I am in Volkelgard. This is the zone of Oradon, so Aldmeri Dominion faction. And main cities are where you'll be spending a lot of time in ESO, whether you're completing quests, working on crafting or upgrading your character, buying and selling items, or just meeting up with your friends or your guildmates. There is a lot to do in the main towns of ESO. So the first thing I want to do is just kind of look at some of the different map icons so you know where to find things. Now, one of the most important locations is going to be the bank. So this is the bank icon. It looks like a little chest. This is where you can store your items and gold and other currencies, and then you can pull those items out of storage. Now, the cool thing about ESO is your bank storage is account-wide, so this would be how you can trade items between other characters that you've added to your account. So maybe you do have one alternate character that you use exclusively for crafting or for guild events. Pretty easy to trade items in between your characters, just store them in the bank, and then you log on to that other character and pull out those items or that currency. Now, I mentioned crafting. One of the icons that you'll look for to do crafting is sort of this fireplace icon. Most of the time, you'll find most of the crafting stations that you need right here in this central area. So this has a blacksmithing station, has a clothing station, plus the clothing merchant and the blacksmithing merchant. Occasionally, you'll find different crafting stations a little bit further away. So over here, this is where we actually have the woodworking station and the carpenter vendor. And then over here to the south, this is where we have some more magical crafting and vendors. So this has the alchemy station, the enchanting table, the jewelry crafting station, plus the outfit station. The outfit stations are where you can change the look of your character's equipment, basically a transmog system. And don't worry, we'll talk about all these different stations in just a few minutes. The scale icon is where you can find different types of vendors. So we have the armor, tailor, the leather worker, general goods merchant, pack merchant, woodworker, and weaponsmith, mystic. So all of those are different types of items you can buy, and every vendor you can also sell to. You can sell off your items for gold. Now in this area as well, we have some very important locations, that being the NPC Guilds, such as the Mages Guild with this icon. You have the Fighters Guild with the sword icon. There is also an Undaunted Guild. Now, they don't have their own separate icon, but typically you'll find them in like an inn or a tavern that's nearby. So for Volkelgard, they'll be in the Salted Wings Tavern. That's where the Undaunted Guild can be found. You also have this icon up here for the Outlaws Refuge. That's typically where you'll find the Thieves Guild. Now over here we have a similar icon for a merchant, but this is actually Guild Traders. So it's a slightly different icon. This is where you can buy and sell items between players. So basically the way that works is you'll need to join a guild. If the guild has a guild trader set up like this one here, you'll be able to post items for specific amounts of gold to sell. And then also as a buyer, you can come up to this vendor and you can buy items that other players have on sale. Now over here at the docks is another often overlooked area, and this is how you can actually fast travel to a lot of other locations without using Wayshrines. Some of this will be dependent on the chapters that you've unlocked, but this also helps us get to other base game zones. For example, we can travel to Grotwood and Reaper's March. Those are other zones in the Aldemary Dominion faction alliance. We can travel to Somerset and Vivek City in Vardenfell. Those are chapter zones. Over here, Davin's Watch. Murkmire is a DLC zone. Gold Coast is another DLC zone. Then there's the boat to Daggerfall, so that will take you to another faction. And by the way, just to point out, those other factions are accessible as soon as you complete your starter zone. If you wanted to go to a different faction, you could. Here's Daggerfall, for example. Here's the Davin's Watch Wayshrine in Stonefall. So those actually do become automatically unlocked. Again, as soon as you progress past the starter zone and get into these main base game zones. Remember, you're not stuck with your faction alliance. You can actually travel to any other alliance faction zone and play those if you prefer. But a couple more icons that you may find helpful. Over here, the Gladiators Quarters. This is going to be for Battlegrounds. So you can purchase different items here and start different quests for the PvP Battlegrounds. Another very important location is going to be the Stable Master. This is where you can upgrade your riding skills, so letting you travel faster with your mount or carrying more items or have greater riding stamina. We'll talk about this in a few minutes, but this is where you unlock those upgrades. You can also purchase mounts here, though you don't technically have to. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. And then finally, we have a housing icon. Now, I've unlocked this house on the previous character. I'll show you how you can get this house completely for free. Houses allow you to have more storage beyond just the bank. Plus, they sort of act as a way shrine where you can travel to your house if you want to. And then sometimes you'll find caravans. That's just another means of fast travel. This one goes to Rothgar, which is the Orsinium DLC, so another chapter expansion zone that you can access through this icon. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is actually visit a couple vendors because I haven't really sold any of my items and my inventory is getting quite full. You can see my capacity is 56 out of 85, so probably a good time to sell off some of those items. So I am going to be going down here to some of the vendors, and I want to go to the general goods merchant, I think. So let's go ahead and find that vendor first. So the basic vendor, I think we mentioned this before, you can purchase things like lockpicks here, which is helpful, but I already have 25 of those, so I'm good. I wouldn't really bother picking up potions. You should be able to get these just from killing monsters out in the world. Soul gems, you should be getting those from quests and loot as well, so I wouldn't worry about those either. But if we were to tab over, this is where I can now see what's in my inventory, and I can start to sell a few things. Now, the most gold that you'll get is for a specific type of weapon and jewelry that has this trait called Ornate. You can see it increases this item's sale price. The first thing I always do is try to sell these. This will give me a lot of gold. Now you also have trash items. You can sell those as well. I do have some tutorial items. Those will have a 0 gold value, but you can sell them just to get rid of them. And I have a couple other basic weapons and gear that I've picked up that I'll want to get rid of just to save some space. I think one thing I will save, though, is the restoration staff. When I get a few more levels, I can actually use 2 weapons at once. I can use a primary weapon and a backup weapon. I may make this restoration staff my backup weapon just to start leveling up some of those skills. So I'm going to hang on to that in case I don't get a better restoration staff in the future. Now, the other items you should think about keeping as well are items with specific traits. So in this case, my maple restoration staff has the powered trait. Now this is actually going to be useful for crafting and research. I can basically deconstruct this item at the woodworking station and research that trait, the powered trait, so that future items that I can craft I can also craft them with the powered trait as well. So that's another good reason to keep on to an item. If you haven't researched its trait yet, make sure to save it and then just deconstruct it at the crafting station. That's also a good rule of thumb for anything with the intricate trait. You'll get bonus inspiration for deconstructing that item. That's basically going to level up your crafting skills a little bit faster. So the other vendor here, which is extremely helpful that you want to make sure to use early, is going to be the pack merchant. This is where you can actually upgrade your backpack space, letting you carry more items. Now, it does get a little bit expensive. You can see it's going to cost me 2,000 gold to get 10 more slots, but I think that's worth it in this case. So now I'm up to 95 slots, which is actually pretty good for a starting character. That's going to let me carry a lot more items before I need to go back into town to sell. The cost of upgrades does increase each time. You can see for my next increase of 10 slots, I'll need about 6,000 gold. So that's just something to keep in mind. I want to keep coming back, selling items to get as much gold as I can to increase that space. Okay, let's head over to the bank next. You can see the sign for the bank at the front of this large building. And another sign for the bank here. This is often one of the more crowded areas in the towns in ESO, so that's just something to look out for, but many times there's also multiple bankers. So there's one here and one here. So if you're having trouble like targeting this one because there's a bunch of players standing here, there is often another banker which you can use as well. So our first option is to withdraw from the bank. And as you can see, I have used this on multiple characters. So I have some higher level items here. Now, I could withdraw these on my new character, but you can see they're in red, which means I am not high enough level to use these items yet. So there's really no point in withdrawing these to my new character. So I can also deposit items. So in this case, I could, for example, deposit that restoration staff that I wanted to use later. The other thing to keep in mind too is that even if I was going to use this for crafting, like deconstruction, for example, crafting stations will look at your bank inventory as well as your character inventory. So depositing this is no problem if I want to make use of that researching at a station in the future. But here you can also see the currencies that I have currently on my character. You can also deposit and withdraw currencies, including gold, alliance points, Telvar stones, and writ vouchers. We'll talk more about these other currencies a little bit later. And you can also upgrade or buy more bank space that costs gold. Quite a bit of gold, actually, but you shouldn't need to do that for a long time. Okay, let's talk mounts and rider training next. And for that, we're going to need to head to the stable master. This is what the building looks like. Okay, so the main options at the stable master are going to be riding training, as well as buying horses or mounts. So let's talk about this first. As you can see, the mounts that they have for sale are quite expensive. And if you've played for a little bit, you may have a mount already that you've either earned through level up rewards. You could have gotten this as a purchasing bonus for buying one of the chapters. So I really don't recommend spending the gold on these mounts, especially this early on in the game. Now in ESO, there's essentially no difference functionally between mounts. All mounts have the same speed, carrying capacity, and so on. But really, it just depends on what your character can do. And that's where we get to the rider training upgrades. So yeah, I don't typically worry about mounts. As I said, you can get a lot of these through things like level up rewards, daily login rewards, achievements, or other means through the crown store. But moving on to riding training, this is something that you do want to be training up every day. You can see we have speed, stamina, and carry capacity. Speed increases the movement speed of your character while mounted up to 60%. Stamina lets you sprint for longer on your mount. You have a sprint meter, just like your character can sprint. Your mount sprint meter gradually decreases. This also affects you taking damage while mounted. And if your stamina breaks, you actually fall off your mount and it takes quite a while to get back up. And then you have carrying capacity. This gives you bonus carrying capacity at all times, even while you're not mounted. So this is a nice investment as well. But mostly what you'll find in ESO as the base mount speed is actually very slow. We'll talk about other ways you can increase this in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to spend 1 upgrade point into speed, taking my riding speed skill from 0 to 1. And you can see now I need to wait until the next day. I think this resets around midnight or like 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, depending on your time zone. Basically, the next day, you'll be able to spend another point here. And it does cost 250 gold to spend 1 upgrade point. By the way, the mounts that you do unlock over your playthrough are going to be found in collections. Go to the collections area, go to mounts, and you can see there are several different categories. So equines are horses. I have a few different ones here. And then you can summon your mount like this. This is kind of the walking speed. You can see also I have a mount sprint meter underneath my own stamina bar. And you can see that because my character here is brand new and doesn't have really any riding speed training, I am quite slow. In fact, if I got off, I would almost be as fast or faster just running myself. But this is something that you can upgrade over time. And it can be quite fast. There's a couple other options that you can get. Here's the elk mount. Here's another option, the Welwa mount. Here's an example of a wolf mount. So as you can see, there's probably dozens of different options for mounts that you can unlock, either through gameplay, through achievements, through the crown store. But like I said, there is no difference in terms of how they function. All of that's going to be based on your riding training, which you can upgrade here at the stable. So the other thing you'll want to make sure that you're doing in these early cities is interacting with the NPC guilds that we mentioned earlier, that being the Mages Guild, the Fighters Guild. And remember, we mentioned the Undaunted Guild. Typically, those show up in like taverns or inns, but these can actually give you completely new skill lines, some powerful skills that you want to get your hands on for any character in ESO. Doesn't matter if you're a DPS, tank, healer, solo build, PvP, there's something useful here for everybody. So what I recommend is you just start by going to the guild hall and then speak to the quest giver, usually right at the entrance. You'll be able to learn a little bit about the guild, and then it's pretty simple. Just ask questions about it, then say that you're ready to join. And there you go. You get a little bit of experience, a little bit of gold, and you unlock the guild skill line. So now you'll see that I have access to the Mages Guild skill line, and I can start unlocking these skills and passives. Same thing here for the Fighters Guild. There we go. Very quickly unlock the Fighters Guild skill line. Here's what that looks like. And lastly, we'll head over to the tavern to find the Undaunted Guild. In this case, they're upstairs.
Greetings, Milksop.
So there you go. We've unlocked the Undaunted skill line. We've also got a couple extra quests. Here's what the Undaunted skill line looks like. Now, the reason why you need to unlock these now, early on your character, is that these do not level up in the typical way that your other combat skills do. All of these level up by just having that skill equipped and gaining experience, right? We already talked about that. But the guild skill lines have different ways that you actually level them up. Fighters Guild, you're going to get progress by killing specific enemies like Daedric enemies, werewolves, vampires, and undead. Those will give you progress, experience towards leveling up your Fighters Guild skill line. Mages Guild is also very different. You actually need to find Mages Guild books out in the world, interact with those books, and that's how you get experience towards the Mages Guild. Undaunted Guild progress, you need to go into dungeons, public dungeons or group dungeons, complete content and achievements in those locations, and that's how you get Undaunted experience. So all that to say that you really are better off unlocking these right now. That way, as we do things, we're going to see that progression, be able to level up these skill lines and then get these new skills, which again are great options for all types of builds and characters in ESO. And don't forget to explore the city as you go and do these different basic things. You'll find Skyshards, for example. Here's one upstairs that I'll want to unlock on this character. Also, make sure to interact with bookshelves, even things that don't look like a bookshelf. You may be able to read a book and then gain some skill points for specific skill lines. In that case, I leveled up my medium armor skill line by 1. For this one, I leveled up my destruction staff skill line by 1. So all of these have a chance of leveling up your skill lines, whether it's weapons skills, armor skills, even your class skill lines and crafting. You're basically leveling those up for free, and it only takes a few seconds to interact with those bookshelves, so definitely do that while you're here. So I got about 5 extra skills leveled up just from wandering around the city. You may even find some Mages Guild books. You can tell these are different because they have the bluish glow coming from them. And this is how you're going to level up the Mages Guild skill line. You can see I got 5 experience towards the Mages Guild right there. Now, a lot of players miss this fact early on, but you can get a starting house completely for free in the Elder Scrolls Online. The way you do that is you're going to find a letter. Typically, this is like near the bank of whatever city that you're in, and it's called Seeking Tenant. Just read this letter and it will start a quest called Room to Spare. And the starting house for Volkilgard is right next to the Wayshrine, which is actually a big benefit. But I'll go ahead and talk to the innkeeper, and she's going to give me a room at the inn for free. So now we have our very own starter home in the Elder Scrolls Online. And we can decorate it, we can put storage here, we can put stations like the Armory Station, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. The great thing about the housing is it is also free fast travel. You can see, for example, if I wanted to just fast travel to this Wayshrine, which is literally 10 feet away, I have to pay gold to do that, but to fast travel to my house is free. I can also fast travel inside or outside. That's a nice feature as well. So if you want just to save some gold, you could fast travel outside of your house, and it's essentially the same as getting to this Wayshrine, just free instead of costing gold. Next up, let's talk about the Outlaws Refuge. This is going to be a location that you will interact with a lot if you like the stealthy or thief sort of playstyle. These always have 2 entrances and exits, one sort of in the center of town and then one further away in case you need to escape if you have too much bounty. Bounty is basically a meter that builds up if you get caught stealing from a shelf or a desk, if you get caught pickpocketing, killing an NPC, even casting some skills if you are a necromancer, for example. All of these acts can build up bounty. And so that's where the Outlaws Refuge comes into play. So let's say that you want to pickpocket an NPC, for example. First thing you'll do is enter Sneak and then get behind that NPC. And if you're close enough, you should have a prompt to pickpocket from their inventory. You'll also see a percent chance, in this case 50 or 75%. But you can see there I successfully pickpocketed an item, and I can sell that for some gold at the Outlaws Refuge. Now let's look at another example of failing to pickpocket an NPC. Here I am approaching, I'm in stealth, I still have, a decent chance, trying to get at least 50% or above. Again, you can improve that with some passive skills, but here I go for it again, making sure that eye is closed, right? So the NPC can't detect me. There's also no nearby NPCs that can see me as well. That's going to mess things up also. So here I got the best spot possible, and I still got caught, and now I have bounty, and I'm disreputable. This means that guards know that I have a bounty, and if the guard sees me, they'll actually come up to me and force me to either return the stolen items and pay the fine, or basically try to kill me. Those are your main options when you have a bounty like this and guards are nearby. But I say no, I'm going to run. It's really not too hard to run from the guards. You can roll dodge, you can break free from any crowd control effects that they put on you. And the nice thing too is that Outlaws Refuge lets you zone back in no matter what. Even if you're still in combat with the guard, you can always escape. So it's really not too difficult to get away. The problem is I gained even more bounty in the process. You can see I went from 19 to about 60 bounty. Now to clear that, I'm just going to go to the Fence Merchant. This is where you sell stolen items and you can also clear your bounty. So you have to pay gold equal to the amount of bounty that you have, 63 in my case. Not terrible, but again, this costs more than probably the value of the items that I was getting from pickpocketing, so not a great use of this mechanic in ESO. But I think a better option by far is just finding some dressers or desks and stealing from those. Oftentimes, there won't even be like any NPCs in these houses or rooms, and it's much easier to get these items, which again, if you go back to that fence merchant in the Outlaws Refuge, you can then sell all those items for profit. You can see the two tabs here, selling items. I have just the basic quality, but as you get more rare items, purple and blue quality, those are worth even more gold. I also have some things that I might want to save for myself, and so I can use the launder tab to pay gold and make that item no longer stolen. The benefit there is that if I get caught by a guard in the future, normally stolen items get removed, but if I've laundered the item, I get to keep the item no matter what. A guard is not going to take it away from me. So those are kind of the two basic ways to use the Fence Merchant and the Outlaws Refuge. The other thing too about the Fence is that your transactions each day are limited. You can see items sold and items laundered has a cap of 50 items for both situations. So you can't do this infinitely. There is a cap that gets reset each day. Like I mentioned, once you start doing this a lot and you also build up the skill line and the passives, you can actually make a pretty decent profit, especially early on in the game where you don't have a lot of means to make gold. This can be a good way to do that. But as I mentioned, your ability to steal and pickpocket, all of this can be improved with the Legerdemain skill line. So you have passives here that reduce the cost of sneak, for example, or the Light Fingers passive helps you pickpocket more successfully. It increases your percent chance. The Trafficker passive actually increases that cap on using the fence, so you can sell or launder many more items per day. Locksmith improves your chances of forcing locks open. And then Kickback reduces bounties, so basically how much you have to pay back to guards and fences to clear the bounty. There's even more to this when we get into talking about the Thieves Guild DLC and the Dark Brotherhood DLC, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So another thing you'll probably find in your starting city is the guild traders that we mentioned earlier. They have this icon. Now, sometimes you'll only see 1 or 2 guild traders. Other times in bigger towns, you might see 6, 7, 8 different guild traders all together in the same area. Now, as I mentioned before, the guild traders are where other players can sort of set up shop and sell their items, and it's where you can buy those same items with your gold. So these are actually one of the most useful traders that you're going to be using all the time, especially more often as you approach endgame, because this is where players can sell really powerful, crafted and drop armor sets, weapons, things like potions and consumables that you're going to be using every day. Probably you're going to find most of those on guild traders. Now the interface is a little bit different depending on whether you're on console or PC. Remember, consoles are very scrolling based, so that's the interface I'm on right now. But you can basically select a category. So in this case, you could do weapons, apparel, jewelry, consumables, materials like for crafting, glyphs, furnishings, companion equipment, and miscellaneous. And then each of these also has subcategories. So for example, if I click on weapons, then I can specify, okay, I want one-handed weapons, two-handed, bow, destruction staff, or restoration staff, right? I'm using a destruction staff, so let's see what's for sale. Just gonna select that and click submit. And then we see our results, right? So you have the name of the item. The time is basically how many days left this item will be listed for. Items start with a 30-day listing, and then they just go down from there. Items are removed from the guild vendor after 30 days. You have the unit cost, which is the cost for one item, and then the total. In this case, these players are only selling one type of each staff, so, they cost the same as the total. Where that really makes a difference is where you purchase consumables or crafting materials. Players will then sell stacks of items, so you'll see the unit cost for one item versus the total cost for the entire stack, just to help you figure out the math a little bit. But you can see also here, as a new player, everything is essentially level 50, so basically, I cannot use much of the equipment here on the guild trader. That's going to be pretty true across the board. Most people only sell endgame gear, which is level 50, CP 160. That's something to keep in mind when you're checking out these guild vendors. So if that's the case, and I am a lower level player, well, what's the point, right? What can I really get out of this? Well, the one thing I would recommend you check out as a brand new player is the Consumables tab, and specifically food and drink items, right? Now, your food tends to be more of the main stats, so like max health, max stamina, max magicka. You tend to get those buffs from health items. You can see a lot of food is level capped as well, so unfortunately I cannot use any of these food items because I'm not level 50, CP 150 yet. But if you keep searching, or if you use the level filter, which is down here, so I'm going to filter to player level, and let's say 0 to 10. You will actually get some really powerful items showing up here. So Bewitched Sugar Skulls, very powerful, and this can actually be used at any level. Now, it is a little bit expensive to be using right now at like level 14, which is what I'm at. But I could buy this, and if this person had posted maybe 1 or 2 of these, it would be pretty cheap. But I could buy and use this right now if I had the gold. Now, what is typically cheaper is the drink items, and the difference for drinks is that these usually give you more recovery stats, so like stamina recovery, magicka recovery, and health recovery. You can see this one called Witchmother's Party Punch. This is a level 1 item, which means I can use it at any level, and this actually gives me a great boost to all 3 of my recovery stats, and it's cheap, 160 gold per unit. Now, the way this works is I do have to buy the entire stack that this person has decided to sell. I can't just buy one. I have to buy all 5, so that would be 800 total gold. But this is still a really good investment for me. Each of these lasts a total of 2 hours. And to be honest, as you're leveling up, one of the best stats you can get is recovery. So I actually do think I want to buy this for 800 gold. And this is going to give me a really great buff that lasts up to 10 hours in total. So let me go ahead and get that. Other good options you want to look out for, which are also pretty cheap. Witchmother's Potent Brew is a sort of a hybrid drink where it does give you max magicka and max health plus magicka recovery. This is really good for magicka focused characters, obviously. And then the stamina version of that is called Dubious Cameron Throne. That gives you max stamina, max health, and then stamina recovery. And again, you can see these are much cheaper. They're about 200 to 300 gold each. But again, the important thing is that there is no level cap on these. You can use these starting at level 1. So this is probably the best thing you can buy on Guild Traders early on. Now finally, how do you collect your item from the Guild Trader? Well, for that, we're going to go to the social menu and our mail. Now we haven't talked about the mail yet. A few things can happen here. Number 1, you can get some items delivered to you depending on like DLC purchases, chapter purchases. Those pre-order items will usually be delivered through your mail inbox. You can also send items to other players, and players can send you items in return. So if your friends are playing the game, you can exchange items that way. And this is where you'll get those items that you purchase from the guild traders sent directly to you. You can see here it's from the guild store. I purchased an item. It shows up as an attachment, and I just take the attachment. And now I have that awesome drink buff in my inventory, and I can just use it to buff my stats. Next up, we'll talk about crafting, which makes up a huge part of the Elder Scrolls Online. As I said earlier, you'll find crafting areas in most major cities. Just look for the forge icon, which looks like this. And so what we have here, blacksmithing station and clothing station. So the blacksmith station just looks like the anvil. It's here where you can craft metal weapons, that being swords, daggers, axes, and maces. So this is going to work for one-handed weapons, two-handers, and dual wield. You can also craft armor at the blacksmith station, specifically heavy armor. Then we have the clothing station. And this is where you can craft light and medium armor. Nearby, we have the woodworking station, which has this icon. This is where you'll be able to craft bows, destruction staff, restoration staff, and shields. Nearby, we have the crystal vial. This is where we'll have some of the more magical focused crafting areas. Over here, we have the enchanting table for creating glyphs. We have the alchemy station for creating potions. And we have jewelry crafting. This is the only one, by the way, where you do need the DLC. Jewelry crafting comes as part of the Somerset chapter, so keep that in mind. But let's start with the clothing station first. This is a nice, easy one since this only lets you craft 2 basic types of armor. Again, that being light armor and medium armor. And the different tabs are the different options you have. We have refining, creation, deconstruction, improvement, research, and patterns. Refining is where you take basic materials like leather scraps in this case, add 10 of those items, and then you can refine them into leather, and leather is what you use to create medium armor. Another example is silk. You can take 10 pieces of silk, refine those into another type of silk, this time called ancestor silk, and you can use those pieces then to create light armor. And something to keep in mind is that there are several ranks or levels of these different raw materials. You can see Ancestor Silk, the raw Ancestor Silk, is the highest level material you can refine to make light armor. It has CP 150 to CP 160. Raw Jute is the lowest level material that you can use to make light armor. You can use this to create that from level 1 to level 14. And there'll be different variations of silk all the way throughout. Same thing for medium armor. We have rawhide scraps. Those can be refined into rawhide for level 1 to 14 medium armor, all the way up to the rubido hide scraps for max level medium armor. Moving on, creation is obviously how you're going to create these pieces. You can see under the clothing station, I have robes, shoes, gloves, hats, everything for light armor first. And then it'll switch over to medium armor pieces. So I have the medium chest, boots, bracers, helmet. So slightly different names, but it just starts with light armor and then it goes to medium armor. You can also choose the level of the item that you're creating. You can choose the style, and then you can choose the trait. Under deconstruct, this is what we talked about earlier, where you can take one of those items that you have either in your inventory or in your bank. You can break it into its component parts, and you can use those raw materials to create new items with crafting. Under the improvement tab, we can then improve the rarity of our items, so you can take them from normal quality to fine, which is green quality, superior, which is blue quality, epic, which is purple, and then legendary, which is gold. Research is another very important tab, especially early on. This is how you learn those traits, and you cannot craft something with this trait until you have researched it. So basically what you would need to do is pick up a piece of armor that has this trait. For example, you can see I have one chest with the well-fitted trait. It's highlighted as researchable. And if I consume this item, then in a few hours, I will have learned that well-fitted trait for the medium armor chest piece, and then I can craft a new medium chest piece with the well-fitted trait if I want. Why is that important? Well, obviously, the more traits you know, the more options you have for creating gear for yourself, for your friends, to sell on guild traders, for alternate characters, but also, this is very important later on for creating crafted sets. Crafted sets require that you know a specific amount of traits before you can actually craft anything. So, for example, you might need to know 3 traits in order to craft anything for a set called Order's Wrath, which is a great crafted set. So you want to start working towards unlocking as many traits as possible in the Research tab. The other thing you need to know about crafting and just getting started is that each crafting station has its own skill line, and you can learn that just by interacting with the crafting station. So you can see now that I've opened the woodworking station, I gained access to that woodworking skill line. And the skill lines for crafting are actually extremely important. So you can see now I have some of the basics. I have blacksmithing, clothing, and woodworking unlocked. Let's go through each of the skills. They're relatively the same for each skill line. So the first skill, in this case called woodworking, this you need to work on leveling up because it allows you to use those materials at higher levels. Sanded oak is kind of one of the base materials for woodworking. And as I level this up, I'll be able to use higher level materials. So in other words, craft higher level destruction staffs or higher level bows or shields. The next one is called Keen Eye. This just makes this resource easier to see out in the world. Third skill is a lumberjack hireling. The hireling can send you some basic materials every day in the mail. So I'd say these two are okay, but may not be worth your skill points right away. The next 3, though, are definitely essential if you want to get involved in a crafting skill. Wood extraction improves the chances of extracting woodworking ingredients So basically upgrade materials when you refine. Then the carpentry skill is going to reduce those research times, allowing you to research more traits at the same time and also research them faster. And then resin expertise, probably the most important one. Resins are essentially your upgrade materials, so you'll be able to upgrade or improve your equipment with fewer resins, which is going to be much more cost effective. So you can see a lot of these also have 3 to 4 skill points that you need to invest. So crafting is a significant investment in ESO, not just with time spent to level up the skill line, but also the amount of skill points you have. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, that being said, there's just a couple places that you really need to focus on early on to benefit from on a new character. Now, one of those that we already talked about is research. Research is something that takes a very long time to build up in the Elder Scrolls Online. That's because every weapon type, every armor type has multiple traits, right? We have sturdy, impenetrable, reinforced, all the way to Nirnhoned, and you have that for every type of item in the game. Bows, Inferno Staff, Ice Staff, Lightning Staff, Restoration Staff, okay? And all of these take time. So if you remember that powered Restoration Staff that I had earlier, I can research this and learn the trait so that I can then craft any powered staff I want in the future at any level, but it does take 5 hours and 24 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and start that right now. It consumes the weapon, so I no longer have that weapon, but I do start my research timer. Now you can see my other options are going to be blocked off because I'm currently researching that restoration staff. This is where that passive that we looked at earlier comes into play, called carpentry. This is going to allow me to research 2 items or even 3 items at once, plus reduce the time that it takes to research them to learn those traits. Now, the other thing too is that my next trait, whatever that is, it's not going to be 5 hours. It's actually going to be about 10 or 12 hours. Each new trait that you research for a weapon or a piece of armor increases the timer. That is why, like I said, researching your traits should be probably the first thing that you do if you want to get started with crafting in ESO, just because it will take a long time to build up the traits. So then the question is, of course, well, what can you do to actually level up your skill line for these different crafting skills? Now, you might think creating items like, the old Skyrim style, creating daggers would be the best way to level up. Well, it's not really that great in terms of leveling up your crafting skill lines. We can do it. So I have, for example, I can create a maple bow level 4. You can see here under the materials section, to increase the level, I just need to move to the right, and it just requires a little bit more of my material, which is sanded maple. So let's go ahead and create a level 14 sanded maple bow. Now you also need to apply a style. You probably have picked up a few style gems at this point. You'll start with whatever your racial style is already unlocked, and then you can learn more styles over time for other races or more interesting styles through style pages. But let's go ahead and create this in the High Elf style. And since I haven't learned any traits yet, I haven't researched any traits on my bow, I'll just create it with no trait. All right, so you can see there I got a little bit of woodworking experience. Now, a much better option, I think, is going to that deconstruction tab and destroying something that you're not going to use anyway. I mentioned earlier the intricate trait. This actually increases your inspiration gained from destructing this item. Inspiration is like the amount of experience you get towards leveling up this crafted skill line. So if I was to deconstruct this maple bow with an intricate trait, I'm going to go ahead and add that and then deconstruct. You can see I got closer to a full level and was able to level up my woodworking skill to 2. I'll head up back to the clothing station, deconstruct some items there so I can start leveling that one up. You can see that I'm getting a lot of components as well, raw materials, upgrade materials, and trait gems. So this is another thing you can do every time you get back to town. Just deconstruct those unwanted items to level up your crafting skill line and get a lot of extra materials. Now, one thing you do need to be careful of, since you will be spamming this deconstruct tab a lot, is just deconstructing the wrong items, especially as you can see here, I have higher level items that are actually in my bank that I've gotten from other characters. I definitely don't want to deconstruct these And let's say, for example, I don't want to deconstruct this maple ice staff. Let's say I actually want to use this on my character, or I want to use it for research or something. You can choose the options here and lock specific items. Items that are locked cannot be deconstructed, deleted, or used for research. So that's another great option. And also under this menu, you can choose to not show banked items and only show what's on your current character's inventory. So again, deconstruct to gain levels and materials, research to gain new traits. Refining, I suggest you wait on these. No matter if you are picking up materials, which you should be, save them for later, because remember those skill lines, once you start unlocking the passives, you'll actually get more bonus materials when you refine these items. Same thing with improvement. I would not recommend improving even your main weapon that you're using at this low of a level. For one thing, to improve this staff from green to blue quality, since my character is not max level crafting, this costs 7 blue upgrade materials. When I'm max level, it's actually going to cost much less. The same holds true for upgrading a blue to a purple quality. With no skill points invested, it's going to cost 10, which is quite a lot. You can reduce that significantly by leveling up your skills. So again, I would not bother upgrading any of my items below max level either. You can see the difference in damage and effect is really not that much. And like I said, it's especially not going to be worth it because you're going to be spending, in some cases, double or triple the amount of upgrade materials that you would have had to spend otherwise. So another great skill line I recommend you level up is Alchemy. Not only will you be able to create some powerful potions and save some gold in the long run, but you get some good passives here. The best of which is called Medicinal Use. This makes your potion effects last longer. And what happens eventually is that when you use a potion, this has a 45-second cooldown, but you can see my effects are only lasting a few seconds. Once you max out that Medicinal Use passive, your potions last for longer than the cooldown, making you basically have the effect up 100% of the time if you want to. This becomes very important for endgame content, for PvP, to sort of maximize the use of those potion buffs. So I do recommend you work on leveling up alchemy when you have time as well. At the Alchemy Station, you can create potions and poisons. Now, in order to level up, I actually recommend you create poisons. That's because to create potions, you need to collect water. Collecting water does take a little bit of time, but with poisons, all you need to collect is grease, and these grease items actually drop from enemies when you kill them. So it's almost like you're going to get more of these without really having to do anything extra. You can see how much I have built up over all my characters, whereas with the water supplies, I don't take time to collect those, so I barely have any. Creating both a potion or a poison will level up your skill line the same. So all we're going to do is combine that grease, which we got by looting enemies, with whatever reagents we've picked up in the world. Combine those together, and you can see this skill line actually levels up very quickly. While we're here, let's talk about outfit styles. So outfits are also a way that you can sort of change your character's look. You'll need to start up here by just selecting an outfit. We have outfit number 1. You can get additional outfit slots if you're interested in this, but usually 1 I think is fine. Then you have the possibility of changing your current armor style to any style that you've learned. You can see I have Argonian styles, I have Breton styles, Dark Elf, High Elf. The styles that I have here are just what I've learned on my characters. When you create a character from a specific race, you then learn those styles. They're added to your style collection, and you can use them in the future on any character that you want. You can see there's also literally hundreds of styles that you can collect beyond the basic racial styles. You'll get a preview here in this area, but some of these you do need to do, like dungeon achievements, trials, certain events like the Halloween event. But there's just so much here. Now, what else is interesting is that you can apply styles from any weight. So even though I'm currently using like a heavy armor chest piece, I don't have to change it just to heavy armor styles. I could make it look like a piece of light armor, for example. Or I could make it look like medium armor as well. You can see each style change does have a gold cost associated with it. This pretty much depends on the rarity of the style. So these basic racial styles will be like 100 gold to transform those. Some of the rarer styles will cost significantly more. Like this chest piece cost 1,000 gold to make that style appear. So it can definitely get expensive. Make sure you keep track of how much you're spending on each piece. Now this works for your weapons as well. I'm using destruction staff, so I can, restyle this to a bunch of different types of destruction staffs that I have earned over time. Some of these come from the Crown store and have different visual effects. Some are earned by achievements. Some are found during special events. But as you can see, there are, again, dozens and dozens of styles for each weapon that you can earn. Final part of this is dyes. So you can see the second tab here. Under styles, we then have dyes. And this will allow you to change the basic colors of the gear that you are styling. So if I wanted to make this purple for some reason, I could make my leather armor purple if I really wanted to. And just like styles, dyes are typically earned through achievements, mostly achievements, in fact. And if you hover over these, it'll tell you exactly which achievement it comes from. As you can see, I have a lot of work I can do here on this character to unlock some more colors with the dye system. And then one more crafting skill we can look at here is cooking. Now, cooking is a bit different where most of what you do has to be unlocked with recipes. You can see as a brand new character, I have nothing that I've learned that I can actually craft. So in this case, you want to start looking for recipes. These can be either looted from enemies, you can earn them through quests, through level up rewards. Most often you just find them sort of sitting in containers, but I have this example, recipe tarragon chicken. If I use that, I then learn that recipe. You can see now I have tarragon chicken as an option that I can cook for myself, and I can craft that because I have the right ingredients, being poultry and seasoning. Again, ingredients also typically come from containers that you loot out in the world. So I'll go ahead and craft a few of those as well while I'm here, just to get started in this skill line. Okay, so we've covered almost everything you can do in the main cities of the Elder Scrolls Online. So you can tell there's a lot to do here to upgrade and progress your character. But now we're actually going to head out into the Overland Zone. As you can see, these zones are quite large and there's so much you can do here as well. We're going to go over a few more of the different types of map markers that you can find and things you can do in Overland Zones. Now, just like our starter zone, Overland Zones will have plenty of points of interest. This could be either a town or a cave, some type of ruins, basically anything. Sometimes these will have enemies you can fight or just side quests that you can do for additional experience. Remember to look for those NPCs with the marker above their head to start the next side quest.
Salem is under siege. We must get this madness under control.
The next thing you should look out for are delves. And delves are like mini sort of dungeons. They typically contain a Skyshard, so you'll be able to level up your skill points. And you can also get some set pieces as loot. So delves are very small. They have small maps that you typically can just run around in a circle and take maybe 5 minutes to complete. They'll have several basic enemies inside which you can kill. They also respawn fairly quickly, but they don't give you a ton of experience. The main thing that you want to do is make your way kind of to the center or the deepest part of the delve and fight the boss. You can see the boss has a special health bar. They might have a little bit more health than your standard enemy, but they really are not too challenging, especially in the base game zones. See, it's just going to take me a little bit longer to defeat this delve boss. But this is how I will complete the delve. You'll get some bonus experience if it's your first time completing it. And the boss will also drop one set piece. So what I got from him, Girdle of the Veiled Inheritance. This is a heavy armor set piece. We'll talk more about the different set pieces you can get in each zone. But then, like I said, each delve also does have one Skyshard. So make sure you get that as well before you leave. Now, Overland Zones for the base game, so not chapter zones or DLC zones, you have Mundus Stones. Mundus Stones are another way to upgrade your character. You'll typically find 3 different Mundus Stones in each of these Overland base game zones. They're all different. It depends on which zone that you're in. But I recommend you just grab one as soon as you can. The first one that you come across, go up to it, use it, and get the bonus that it provides. The lady gives me bonus physical and spell resistance, so that's going to make my character a little bit more tanky. I'm going to take less damage when I get hit. Eventually, once you unlock more of the Overland Zones, once you go through more of the story quests and such, you'll be able to pick up a more customized, let's say, Mundus for you. For example, if you want to do more damage, you would definitely want like the Thief Mundus to increase your critical chance, or the Lover Mundus to increase penetration, or the Shadow Mundus to increase critical damage. If you're a healer, you probably would want like the Atronach Mundus Stone to increase your Magicka recovery, or the Ritual Mundus Stone to increase healing. Tanks can actually use the Lady Mundus, again, to increase resistances, or I believe that's called the Lord Mundus. You increase your max health. That's another good one as well. But as I said, just pick up whatever you have access to right away. You can see this shows up as a permanent buff on your stat sheet, and you can see exactly what you got here to improve your character. Now you want to keep unlocking your Wayshrines. Make sure you discover those. Add them to your map, because that is your fast travel network, right? So now if I wanted to quickly travel back to town, I could use either my home or the Vocal Guard Wayshrine. And then if I want to travel back here, use the Windy Glade Wayshrine, I can go back and forth. And you'll find Wayshrines sort of connected all throughout the Overland Zone to get you around faster. But you do have to discover them first. Keep looking for resources. Those crafting materials will definitely come in handy if you want to craft items yourself or just level up those skill lines. Of course, look for lore books, those blue tinted books that are going to help you level up your mage's skill line. One of the best things you can do in the Overlands, though, is the world events. In the base game, these are called dolmens. Now, if you've started the main story quest with the Prophet, you sort of understand what these are and why they exist, so I'm not going to spoil that for you. But basically, these just spawn a ton of enemies. You try to close these anchors. To do that, you need to defeat a final boss, but typically there's a lot of players here to help you out, so you can do this even early on. And there's a couple great reasons why you want to do this. As I close this here, you can see I get a nice boost to experience. I also get a big chunk of Fighters Guild experience, and I get even more loot. In these dolmen chests, once you destroy the dolmen, you're going to get one piece of jewelry from the zone's set pieces. So in this case, I got a ring. It was a Ring of the Twin Sisters. So if I was interested in collecting this set, the best way to get the necklace or the rings is to farm these dolmens. Now, there's actually 3 dolmens in every Overland Zone. Typically, they're spread out. So you'll have one here, one sort of at the middle, and then one sort of at the top around here. And sometimes players just use Wayshrines and go from one dolmen to the next. It's called a dolmen farm because, like you saw, you get a ton of experience. It's a very fast way to level up your Fighters Guild skill line, which is a very good skill line in ESO. Can unlock these abilities, and you get pretty good loot that you can either use for yourself or you can sell those jewelry pieces on guild traders if you find a set that people are interested in buying. Now, other zones have world events as well. It's not going to be dolmens, though. In the different chapters, they kind of had their own versions. So like Somerset has geysers, for example. The Elsewhere chapter zones actually have dragons instead of dolmens. So the world events for the chapter zones are actually quite a bit more difficult in some cases. But yeah, definitely a lot of fun, especially as you can participate with different players and earn some great rewards. Another piece of content you only find in these Overland Zones is public dungeons. I highly recommend you do public dungeons as well, though these are definitely a lot harder than the basic delves that we saw earlier. There is an increased difficulty here having to do with more enemies, especially large groups of enemies that will attack you at once, and more challenging bosses. Now you can team up with other players here if you want. It does make it slightly easier. Most public dungeons also have a related side quest that you can do. These are usually really easy, so I recommend you do the side quest at the same time. Now, like delves, public dungeons will also have their own Skyshard, so you should pick that up while you're here. But unlike delves, which only really have one boss, public dungeons actually have around 4 to 5 bosses. These definitely can hit a lot harder, especially if you're doing public dungeon in a DLC or a chapter zone. You can see I definitely wasn't ready for that one. I even used my potion. But each boss will also drop a set piece for the current Overland Zone. And these bosses in the public dungeons actually drop weapons. It's something you won't get from a Delve boss. You can see here I got a great sword of the Twin Sisters. So that Twin Sisters set, got a two-handed weapon for that one. So if you want to farm weapons for a particular set, public dungeons is definitely going to be the place that you want to be. That boss gave me a restoration staff, so you can see I'm farming these sets pretty quickly. That's the advantage of public dungeons. Now, one of these bosses in each public dungeon is special. They are what's called the group boss, and they may or may not be slightly harder than the other bosses in this public dungeon. They may also have special mechanics, maybe some more enemies added into the fight to make the encounter a little bit more interesting. Now, you do not need to be in a group to complete the group boss. They are still easy enough for, I'm only level 14. I can still do this solo. Having a group definitely helps, though. But the main reason why you want to do the group boss at least once is, as you can see there, I gain 1 skill point. So first time I kill this special boss, I will unlock the achievement, and I will get that extra skill point. So it is really useful to farm public dungeons at least one time. Skill points in ESO are huge. As you saw, the more you can get, the better. Now, the other content you're likely to come across in Overland Zones is the world bosses. Now, these have sort of the skull icon on your map, and these you want to be careful with, especially if you're under level 50. They deal a lot of damage, so I can try to solo this on my level 14 character, but I don't think it's going to happen. You're better off with just sort of waiting to see if somebody else is going to come along, but now that I have a lot of people here, should be no problem. But if it's your first time defeating that monster, you'll get an achievement, you'll get some bonus experience. And the great thing about world bosses is you do get more set pieces. This is great if you're looking for pieces like the chest or the helmet, for example. World bosses are one of the best way to get those specific pieces. One more thing you'll discover out in these Overland Zones is crafted set locations. These have an icon very similar to the Forge icon that we found in the main city. And this is where you can craft specific sets with different bonuses. So not crafting just basic equipment, but now 5-piece sets with different effects. You can see at this crafted set location, I have everything that I would need to craft pieces of set gear. I have blacksmithing station, jewelry crafting, woodworking, and clothing. And this particular set is called Death's Wind. So if I was to open up the woodworking station, for example, each crafted set requires a certain number of traits to be researched before you can actually craft that piece. You can see with the Death Wind set, I need to research 2 or more traits to be able to craft a set piece. Over on the right side, you can see the different set bonuses that come with Death's Wind. This gives me armor, 2 max health bonuses, and when I take melee damage while under 35% health, you knock back and stun all enemies once every 15 seconds. So it's kind of a cool, survival set. It's one of the more simple, basic crafted sets. They get much better and much more complex than this. But you can see I actually need 2 traits researched on any piece in order to craft it. So I can't craft the bow yet. I can't craft, an Inferno staff or an ice staff. But remember, I was starting to research some restoration staff traits. Previously, I researched the powered trait. We did that a little while ago. And since then, I've also researched one other. I think it was, the decisive trait. So the fact that I have now 2 of these traits researched on my restoration staffs in general means I can now craft a Death's Wind restoration staff if I would like to. So pretty much everything else applies to crafting here. You set the level using the specific components. You then set the style. Of course, I only have high elf style on my high elf character currently. And then you choose the trait. Obviously, I can only do traits that I've researched. But let's go ahead and craft this just to see how it works. And I will make sure to set the level to my current level, which is 14, and then craft that powered restoration staff. There we go. So if I wanted to use that, for example, I could put it on, let's say, my back bar. Here's my restoration staff of Death's Wind. You can see with this equipped, I actually get the 2-item bonus, and that's because Destruction Staff, Restoration Staff, Two-Hander, and Bow all count as 2 set bonuses. That's because they're a 2-handed weapon. So basically, you would have 2 slots here from dual wield. You could run 2 single-handed weapons and get two items for your set bonus, or you could run 1 2-handed weapon and also get 2 set bonuses. So that's kind of how that works as well. But in terms of crafted sets, like I said, this one is very basic. Most Overland Zones have 3, so they're all sort of spread out across the map. You'll have 3 different crafted sets that you can craft for yourself if you know enough traits. And like I said, the spread and sort of complexity of these sets is all over the place. They'll start with, basic ones. You need 2 traits researched all the way up to 9 traits. There are some crafted sets which require that you learned all 9 traits before you can actually craft anything from that set. Those are the more advanced crafted sets. And now that we're here, this would actually be a great time to talk more about those traits and what they can actually do for your character and your build. Now, we did start off by talking about Powered, which increases your healing done by 5% for just a basic, white quality normal weapon. This scales up higher based on your upgrades. So if you upgrade your weapon eventually to legendary quality, this will be higher, 7-8%, something like that. So Powered is excellent if you plan on being a healer for group content. If you want to be a healer for dungeons and trials, Powered is very good because you will heal for more health. This can also be great for PvP builds for a little bit more survivability, keeping yourself or your group mates alive a little bit longer. It's a very good trait to pick up. Next up is Charged. Charged increases your chance to apply status effects. So these are things like the Burning status effect, Poisoned, Diseased. These apply additional damage to targets and sometimes negative effects or debuffs. So Charged is very good. You see all types of builds using this. DPS builds use it because, like I said, you get more damage from status effects. Tanks and healers can use it to apply debuffs to enemies. So it is a very popular trait in ESO, and it's quite powerful. Next up, we have Precise. Now, this is typically reserved for DPS or damage dealer type builds, even solo builds, because it increases your critical chance. This will be closer to about 7% with a gold or legendary quality weapon, so it's quite a good sized buff for your build. And so most builds will run this to increase their damage because the more crit chance you have, the more often you get those critical strikes, which deal significantly more damage than your normal attacks. Infuse is another very good trait for weapons. You'll typically see this on backbar weapons to apply glyphs and make those glyphs stronger. So this increases the weapon enchantment or the glyph effect and reduces the enchantment cooldown. You can combine this with a weapon and spell damage glyph, for example, and get a very big buff to your overall stats. Tanks and healers can also use this with different debuffing glyphs, like the Crusher enchant, for example, which reduces enemy armor, to make those enchantments even stronger. So this, again, is another popular choice for weapon traits. Defending is good for, let's say, PvP builds if you want to increase your resistances. Training, great for leveling up. We have this on some of our weapons already. You'll get this from weapons for the level up rewards. And from some quests in the game, it just makes your leveling a little bit faster. Sharpened is another good damage trait. This increases your physical and spell penetration, making your attacks do more true damage or basically ignore some of the enemy's resistances. The higher penetration you have, the more of those resistances you actually bypass. So this can be good, especially in solo content where you don't have tanks to debuff enemy resistances for you. And for PvP content, where players can run very high resistances and you need to cut through those, Sharpened is a good trait. Decisive is great for tanks, especially. It increases the chance you have to gain more ultimate. And finally, Nerdhone just increases your raw damage from this particular weapon. So you will see this on DPS builds. Sometimes they'll run this on maybe a dual-wield weapon, perhaps. You do see it on PvP builds as well, just to increase that sort of burst damage potential, making you do as much damage as possible. Because in PvP, you have a very limited window amount of time to deal damage before a player reacts. So Nerdhone is a good PvP trait as well. So that's what we have in terms of weapon traits, just to give you an overview. In terms of armor traits, there are some different ones, obviously. So armor, we have Sturdy. This reduces the cost of block. This would be great for a tank build. Impenetrable is great for PvP. This increases your critical resistance by 110 for normal quality items, and you also have less durability damage to these set pieces. Reinforce increases the item's armor value, so just more physical and spell resistance. Great for tanks, great for solo and PvP builds to increase your survivability. Well Fitted reduces the cost of roll, dodge, and sprint. Again, this is typically a PvP trait where sprinting and roll dodging is a little bit more important and useful. We have the training trait again. Great to have this on armor pieces as well, just because these stack, right? So if I have armor pieces with training, if I have weapons with training, I'm going to level up even faster. Infused can be used to increase your enchantment effect. So you can see this typically on armor pieces, such as the helmet, the chest, and the legs, because those glyphs actually give more value. They give higher numbers on those 3 pieces. And then if you buff those again by using an infused trait, you'll actually get a lot out of that, whether you choose to have a health glyph or a stamina or a magicka or even a triglyph, which has all 3 stats with a little bit less value. You're going to get more bang for your buck by running an infused armor piece in that slot. Invigorating can be great if you're focused on recovery. Again, I see this a little bit more in PvP with builds that just want ultra high recovery to be able to do lots of skills without running out of resources. Divines is pretty much your go-to trait for PvE content. This buffs your Mundus Stone, essentially, and this is also stackable as well. So imagine you have, 7 pieces of Divines. This is going to give you over 30% bonus to your Mundus Stone. Once you get these legendary quality, you're getting closer to, 50%. So combine that with whatever effect is currently on your Mundus Stone. For DPS builds, that's usually going to be the Thief Mundus to increase critical chance. And so you're going to get 50% additional critical chance from that Mundus Stone by wearing all Divine's armor. So like I said, PvE content is where you'll see this the most, especially if you want to increase your damage, combining this with something like the Thief Mundus Stone. Nerdhoned, similar to Reinforce, it just increases your physical and spell resistance. And that is it for armor traits. Lastly, we also have jewelry traits, and if you have access to jewelry crafting, you can craft these for yourself as well. So first up, we have Healthy. This increases maximum health, pretty basic. Then we have Arcane, increases maximum magicka. Again, very simple. And then Robust is going to be the stamina version of that. So these are kind of your 3 base traits that you'll find throughout the game. Typically, heavy armor sets are going to drop jewelry with the Healthy trait. Light armor sets are going to drop jewelry with the Arcane trait. And then medium armor sets will drop jewelry pieces with the Robust trait. Now, everything else has to either be crafted onto a piece, typically, or you can also change the trait of armor. We'll talk about how you can do that in a little bit. It's a little bit more advanced. But here are those additional traits. So Swift increases your movement speed. Very nice for PvP, just to be a little bit faster. Harmony gives you some resources back when you activate a synergy. Synergies appear in group content when you use specific skills. It's sort of like a bonus effect that you can activate, and sometimes it comes from a group member's skill. So groupmate casts a specific skill that has a synergy. You'll get a prompt that appears on your screen. You can then activate the synergy to get some effect, like some bonus damage or healing for free. And then if you have Harmony, you'll get a flood of resources back as well. Triune is like a combination of the 3 basic traits that we saw before, so it increases your max magicka, stamina, and health. It is a little bit more efficient though. You'll see that you only get about 700 resources here for the normal quality jewelry. Then when we look at Triune, we're getting over 1,000. So you can see you're getting more bang for your buck for running Triune. This would be great for like tanks who use pretty much all resource pools, health, magicka, and stamina. I wouldn't use this on like a DPS or a healer though, because you tend to be focused more on one of those main resources, either magicka only or stamina only. Bloodthirsty is going to be great for anybody that wants to deal more damage because this increases your weapon and spell damage the lower health your enemy gets. Protective is another defensive trait for jewelry, so this increases your spell and physical resistance by about 1,000. And then Infused is another great option for jewelry, just like it is for armor. This increases the effect of your enchantment. So if you're using a, let's say, weapon and spell damage glyph, you're going to get more weapon and spell damage on that ring or that necklace than you would have if you use something else. Now, typically for damage, especially as we look at longer fights, things like dungeon content and trial content, Bloodthirsty tends to win out in terms of just raw damage, especially in longer fights, like I said. Infused, you'll see this more on like tanks and healers that combine this with a recovery glyph, for example. So in those longer fights, for those types of builds, you need lots of recovery. You can combine that in that case. For damage dealers, you might see this more on like a PvP build where you want a ton of damage up front to try to get an enemy's health down as quickly as possible. You could use maybe some infused weapon and spell damage glyphs in that case. Now, the other question you might have about crafting specifically, or just item sets in general, which is in terms of those armor pieces, which one is better, right? Should I wear heavy armor? Should I wear light armor? Should I wear medium armor? And what's the difference? Well, one of the most obvious differences is just the protection that each one of these offers, right? So if I was to compare, for example, a light chest or a light robe, it's essentially the same. This has about 1100 armor value. That's at level 14, which is my current level. If I switch that over to medium armor, the medium armor chest plate gives me 1600 armor at level 14. And if I was to compare that to a heavy armor piece, which I have to craft at the blacksmith, this gives me 2200. So about 600 increase each time in armor value going from light to medium to heavy. That's the obvious difference in terms of those armor weights. So obviously, if you want more protection, heavy armor is going to be your best choice. But that's not the only thing to consider when looking at armor types. Really, you want to look at the skills and the passives most of all. So you can see, first of all, each armor type comes with some specific bonuses. And these are truly passive. You don't even have to put skill points into these to get these to show up. So your light armor bonuses, you reduce damage from magical attacks, reduce roll dodge cost, reduce sneak penalty, reduce the cost of break free, and reduce the cost of bash. Okay, but you also get some penalties. You increase damage taken from martial attacks, that being physical attacks. You increase the cost to block and decrease your damage done with bash. Now these are relatively small, but keep in mind, this is per piece. Okay, medium is kind of in the middle, as you might expect. This doesn't have any bonuses or penalties when it comes to magical or physical damage types. It does reduce your sprint, sneak, and block cost. And it also reduces your damage taken from AoE or area effect attacks after using roll dodge. So that's pretty straightforward. And then when we look at heavy armor, it's going to be kind of the opposite of light armor. So you reduce damage taken from martial or physical attacks, but you increase damage taken from magical attacks, and kind of, like I said, the opposites of what we saw with those light armor bonuses. Now, what you really want to pay attention to as well is the passives, and this really dictates sort of what your build will be like if you specialize or you focus on wearing this specific armor weight. So for heavy armor, our passives are going to give us even more physical and spell resistance. We'll get more health recovery and restore magicka and stamina when we take damage. So this is going to be great, obviously, for tanking, for absorbing damage and helping us sustain our resources. We'll get even more max health per piece of heavy armor, and we have bonuses to heavy attack restoration and healing received. You can see there's actually 0 bonuses to offense. So if you want to deal damage, heavy armor is not the way to go because, as you can see, it's mostly focused on survivability. But when we look at our other types, this is where we see some passives that actually involve things like damage and sustain. So dexterity increases our critical damage. I'm on medium armor right now. Bonus critical damage and bonus critical healing. We get bonus stamina recovery and reduce the cost of our stamina abilities, again, per piece of medium armor worn. This is why you'll see most builds that focus on stamina, right? That stamina resource pool, you're putting all your points into stamina. You're using mostly stamina abilities, like let's say two-hander or dual-wield skills. It makes sense to run more medium armor pieces because it increases your stamina recovery using the Windwalker passive, and it reduces the cost of those stamina skills so you can cast them more often. You also have bonuses to sneak, so if you're into that, thief, pickpocketing playstyle, medium armor is great for that, and you get bonus weapon and spell damage and increased sprint. So medium armor, again, is kind of like a good raw damage playstyle, especially with this one, the agility passive. This is the only armor type that's going to boost your raw damage in terms of weapon and spell damage stats. Light armor is focused more on critical chance and penetration as well. So if we look at some of these, Grace reduces the effectiveness of snares and reduces your cost of sprint. but then Evocation increases magicka recovery and reduces magicka cost. So it's sort of the opposite of the Windwalker passive from medium armor. In this case, this is going to be better for builds that focus on magicka, casting a lot of magicka-based skills, putting all your points into the magicka attribute. You want some light armor to take advantage of the Evocation passive. Then Spell Warden, we get bonus spell resistance, so we'll take less magical damage. And then here's those two passives that I talked about. Prodigy increases your crit chance rating. So same thing as like the Thief Mundus or a precise weapon trait. Light armor builds are going to have the most critical chance in the game due to this passive. And it's going to be multiplied by 7 because it's per piece of light armor equipped. And in concentration, you get extra physical and spell penetration. So if you really want to slice through enemies and you're not having like a tank debuff enemies for you, then using light armor is going to be a great way to do that because your attacks are going to bypass more of the enemy's resistance, letting those skills do more true damage. So hopefully that breakdown makes sense, and it's not an all or nothing thing. In fact, you can run, a mix of these weights and get some bonuses from each of them. Taking that hybrid approach actually makes sense kind of towards endgame, where we'll start to unlock some more passives. One in particular from the Undaunted skill line is called Undaunted Metal, and this increases all of your stats per type of armor that you have equipped. So you can see that since I'm using all 3 types, I have some heavy, I have some medium, and some light, I would have a 3% bonus. Whereas if I was using all light armor, this would only be 1% bonus. So you do get rewarded in this game for mixing and matching. Of course, you can focus on one in particular if you want to max out any of those specific passives that we looked at. So the advantage of crafting your own sets is obviously you can make those in any order you want. You can craft body pieces or weapons or jewelry and set up your build any way that you want. Now with the Overland sets, it's a little bit different. You need to farm those, as we saw, by going into delves and public dungeons, killing world bosses, and doing world events like dolmens. And each of those types of content actually drops specific pieces from those Overland sets. Delve bosses, which is kind of the most basic content, they are going to drop either a waist, so a belt piece, or feet. Public dungeons, kind of that next level up, those bosses drop shoulders, gloves or hand pieces, weapons like we saw, again, from any of the Overland sets in the zone. World bosses, a little bit harder. The world bosses can drop headpieces, chest, legs, and weapons. Finally, those world events like dolmens as they appear in the base game zones, those are going to drop jewelry, so rings and necklaces. So there you have kind of the key or the legend to how you can find specific set piece drops in the Overland Zones. Now remember, each Overland Zone also drops 3 specific sets. One set is going to be light, one set is going to be medium, and one set is going to be heavy. Now that is random, so you never know if you're going to get a light piece, a medium piece, or a heavy armor piece. You do obviously know which types you're going to get depending on which content you do. But other than that, you can also get these any random set piece item from treasure chests. So it does pay to kind of roam around and try to get chests if you're farming a specific Overland set. And also, just random enemies have a very small chance of dropping random pieces from any Overland set in the zone as well. But now that we've talked more about Overland sets, how to get them, it's really important that we also talk about an idea called set collection. And set collection is ESO's way of kind of saving all the sets that you've earned in-game so that you could build them later if you want to, like let's say on another character. And the set collection process also makes it easier to collect other pieces in that same set with something called curated drops. So let me show you what I'm talking about. If we were to go over to collections and set items, you can see here that every set in the game is listed by zone. So I'm currently in the zone of Auradon. And those 3 sets that we talked about before, we got the light armor set, which is Queen's Elegance. We have the medium armor set, which is Twin Sisters. And we have the heavy armor set, which is Veiled Inheritance. So you can see that every set has the same pieces, right? There's chest, there's legs, the different armor pieces. There's all the different weapon types. So daggers, axes, maces, swords. There's 2-handed swords. There's 1-handed. There's destruction staff, restoration staff, shields, right? There's everything here, including jewelry. Those are all the possible set pieces for every set. Now, the game keeps track of those for a couple reasons. Like I said, through crafting and reconstruction, if I've collected a piece, and let's say I destroy it or I sell it, I can actually make another one later, and I could even make it at a higher level. That's called set reconstruction. Now, the other really cool thing is called set curation, and that means that any of the set pieces that I have not collected yet is more likely to appear the next time I get a set drop. So, for example, if that monster is able to drop, shoulders and let's say hands and weapons, like let's say it's a public dungeon boss, well, since I already have the shoulders and the gloves collected for the Veiled Inheritance set, that boss should only drop weapons until I've collected all the weapons. And once I've collected everything that the boss can drop, it then goes back to random. So that's this idea of set curation. Hopefully it's going to let you collect these set pieces a little bit faster. Again, that's based entirely on the rules for that particular boss or encounter. So even though I've collected all the jewelry pieces, that doesn't mean the dolmen is going to start dropping weapons for me, because dolmens can't drop weapons. I'm still going to get a random jewelry piece. So it's really more useful when it comes to like public dungeon bosses and world bosses. When you're trying to farm the weapon pieces, you can see there's so many different weapon pieces that these are typically the last ones you'll be able to collect. Now, how you actually collect the items is important, because just picking up an item from an Overland set does not mean that you have collected it. I have a couple examples here in my inventory of weapons which I picked up. Here's one, Greatsword of the Twin Sisters. You can see on the tooltip it actually says it's not collected, which means it's not in my collection yet. I have the same thing here for Sword of the Veiled Inheritance, also not collected. So the different ways you can add these to your collection, you can just sell it to a merchant for gold. That'll add it to your collection. You can also equip it on your character if you wanted to use it, for example. I can equip it and collect the item. You can see there it's updated my sets, and I've collected the Sword of the Veiled Inheritance. The other way is just binding the item. So once an item has been bound to your character, you cannot trade it, you cannot sell it. You can put it in the bank and you can give it to other characters on your account if you would like to. But once an item has been bound, you basically can't trade it or give it to somebody else. So in the menu, there's also the option to simply bind it without equipping. You can see it's going to permanently bind the Greatsword to my account. And again, that should add it to my collections. Now it says it's collected, and if I were to go back to that collections menu, you can see I have the Sword of Veiled Inheritance, and I also have down here my Greatsword of the Twin Sisters, now part of my set collections. So something that we haven't really talked about as of yet is death and fall damage. So fall damage is a thing in ESO, as you probably would expect. It can be quite punishing. So as the death recap tells us, make sure to watch your step, especially if you're mounted. Very easy to lose control of your character when that happens. But basically, when you die, you have a few different options. You'll see a screen like this, the death recap screen. Now, it can be useful to toggle this and see what different damaging effects you've taken. If you keep dying over to a certain boss or a specific like dungeon encounter, or even in PvP, you'll be able to see on this screen exactly what killed you, how much damage it gave you, so you can plan a little bit better for next time. But basically, my two options now for death is I can do quick travel to a Wayshrine, and will send me to the nearest Wayshrine, or if I want to be revived on the spot, I can use a filled soul gem. So let me go ahead and do that. Typically, using your soul gem is better, so you don't have to go all the way back to the Wayshrine. You can see you'll be sort of ghostly for a few seconds. You can't do anything, can't cast skills, you don't take damage, you can't heal, but now I'm back to normal. And now, like I said, you will need a filled soul gem in order to revive yourself or to revive another player. Empty soul gems will not work for that. You can fill those up if you have empty ones by using the soul magic skill line. Similar to other Elder Scrolls titles, you can fill an empty soul gem with the soul trap ability. But I typically have a lot more filled soul gems than empty. You can get these from level up rewards, from daily rewards. A lot of the daily activities that we'll talk about in a few minutes give these as rewards as well. So usually you don't have to worry about this, and you may have so many that you can actually start selling some of your extras and make some gold. You can see during group encounters, other players can revive you, but that also takes a little bit of time. It can be tricky. Obviously, it's a little bit easier with a coordinated group. I'll try to revive this guy, just use my soul gem and channel the revive. Oh, I got interrupted here. This is not looking good. Yep, this is not looking good. At least I'm getting some Fighters Guild experience from all these undead. This is not good. Okay, but another player is back, so we might make it. I'll go ahead and revive myself. Now, you can't always revive yourself, especially in dungeons and trials. You'll be locked from doing that yourself, and a teammate will actually need to revive you, or we have to wait until the encounter is completely done. Now, the other thing that soul gems can be used for is recharging your weapon glyphs. So you can see how I have a meter here on my Inferno Staff. It's about halfway filled, and this is what's charging my Oblivion Damage glyph. This is a really powerful glyph, by the way. It's a great thing to use as a new player, because it just deals consistent damage. But you can see eventually this will get drained, and once that reaches 0, I won't be able to use the glyph. Basically, it won't work anymore. So what I can do is use the charge option. You can see I can pick any one of my soul gems, and I can recharge it back to full. Now, the other issue I'm having right now, having played for quite a bit, is I'm actually losing some durability on my armor. Some of my armor pieces are actually broken. You can see this with the red armor icon next to my potion quick slot. And I can show you what I mean. If I were to go over these items, you can see they have the same sort of meter, but this isn't the glyph status. This is actually the armor's durability. So you can see my helmet's about halfway destroyed. Chest piece is lower, shoulders are almost gone, and then a couple of these, my leggings and my boots, are completely useless. You can see now the armor value is in red. I am actually getting 0 armor out of the 600 plus armor I should be getting, or the 1000 plus armor I should be getting from my boots. I'm getting none of it. So this is really important as well. You want to make sure that you are repairing your broken gear. Usually when you come back into town after adventuring, when you're coming back to sell some items, you'll want to make sure to repair your gear at the same time. Now, luckily, most vendors in the main cities of ESO will let you repair your gear as well. You can see I have the same options for buying, selling, buying back, and repairing. Now, you can repair individual pieces if you're really low on gold, and let's say I only want to repair those broken, leggings and my broken boots. I can do that. I can wait, for later if I want to, but really I should be repairing all of this at once. It's only going to cost me as much as, the pieces have actually deteriorated. So I'm going to go ahead and just repair all. That's going to save me a little bit of time. The gold cost isn't going to be different either way. Now you can purchase repair kits to take with you out into the wilderness. I find that I come back to town often enough where it just works out where I can repair then. I don't need to buy any additional repair kits. Sometimes you'll get these for free from like daily login rewards and stuff like that. Feel free to use those if you want. Either way is completely fine. Okay, so once you hit level 15 in the Elder Scrolls Online, this is a big stepping stone for your character because this unlocks weapon swapping and being able to use a primary weapon and a backup weapon. So the way this works now is that I have 2 sets of weapon slots. You can see I have my main hand and my offhand, so this would be or if I want to use a destruction staff, for example, or if I want to dual wield, I would put it in my main hand and my offhand. This is my primary weapon slots. Now I also have a new set of slots for backup weapon. In this case, I'm still a magicka user. I could use like a restoration staff. I'm just going to use another destruction staff. But I'll do a frost staff on my back bar. Since I got the warden, the frost magic is going to be very thematic. It's going to fit this build pretty well. So I have an inferno staff now on my primary or my front bar. Sometimes that's what it's called. And then I have an ice staff for my backup weapon. Sometimes this is called the back bar. Now, the other reason it's called that is because what happens is it unlocks a completely new set of skills, open skills that you can use on your character. You can see these are got my inferno staff here, right? So those skills did not change. But I can now swap to my backup weapon And now I have 5 blank slots for those basic skills, and I have another slot I could use yet another ultimate. So this is where the theory crafting and the build craft of ESO becomes even more interesting because I have 6 more slots I can fill. Now, one thing I have to do right away is you'll find with some pet skills, like the Warden Bear pet, some of the Sorcerer pets, if you don't have them active and if you're not using them on both your primary skill bar and your backup skill bar, when you switch, that pet dies. Kind of sad. So first thing I'm going to have to do if I want to, use the bear pet on this build is I'm going to have to use it on both skill bars. In this case, that way when I have him active and I bar swap, he's going to stay around for me. So that's really good. But other than that, I have a bunch of free skill slots that I can use. Now, you remember back when I was leveling up, I had some skills here that I learned, but I just stopped using them because I wanted to level up the next skill in the skill line, right? So an example of that would be Ice Fortress. I stopped using Ice Fortress because I wanted to level up Impaling Shards, but Ice Fortress is actually a really good armor skill that I would like to use. So what I can do now is put this on my backup skill bar. Let's say I put it right here. And now I just have to cast it when I want to use it. When I want to buff before combat, for example, I'll go to that backup skill bar, cast my buff, and then bar swap to my primary or my front skill bar. And now I have all my offensive skills, can do some damage. I have those buff timers active that we went over in the settings. So I'll also see when my armor skill is about to run out, can go to that back bar and then recast it, maintain my buff. So my character, it still maintains her power. Now, other things players typically do with their back bar skill slots, you put damage over time effects there. That's because they last longer, and so I won't need to refresh them quite as often. So a great thing I can do here would be, for example, put Wall of Elements here. I can also put Impaling Shards. I can even run more skills here if I wanted to. I could do Soul Trap, for example. Now I have room to actually use this skill. And I could put like an emergency heal, maybe fungal growth here. So this is just sort of a very basic setup just to kind of give you the idea. Again, things like buffs, things like emergency heals and damage over time effects, those are usually located on the backup skill bar. You only use them when you need to refresh them. Then your more offensive skills, your AoE, your single target damage, you can put those on the front bar to focus on dealing damage. Now, the other thing you can do, obviously, is you can equip different weapons. So let's say I wanted to do like a fun hybrid build, Warden/Ranger. I could do a bow as my primary weapon, and I could do an ice staff as my backup weapon. So obviously, I'm going to need to start building up this skill line, getting some experience with the bow equipped. I haven't actually done that yet. But I should be able to get, some bow skills pretty quick here. So let's do the snipe skill from the bow skill line here. Let's do something else here. Make sure I'm not using any destruction staff skills on my primary skill bar anymore. And now I have a completely different build. I have a nice range bow build here with my bow and my Screaming Cliff Racer. And then I have destruction staff skills, ice magic on the back bar. Have my frost armor. So this is now an even more interesting setup, combining 2 different weapon types. I actually like this build a lot. I might keep this going. So there you go, just some fun different options you can consider. Now that you can use 2 weapons at once, and you have also 2 different skill bars. Something I definitely recommend you try in ESO once you've unlocked at least both skill bars, a few set pieces, and a variety of skills and passives is to jump into PvP. Now I know some of you might dislike the idea of player versus player combat, but ESO actually has tons of options, which are pretty addictive, and best of all, the rewards are really useful for your character. Now early on, you'll unlock 2 brand new skill lines called Assault and Support. Assault gives you a powerful early heal called Vigor, which costs stamina, which is rare for a heal and also provides some great benefits like increased armor or healing for allies. Then there's Caltrops, which can slow and debuff enemies, and Warhorn, which is the go-to support ultimate in the game, for both tanks and healers in all forms of content, especially in PvE. The first passive you get in this skill line, called Continuous Attack, also buffs your mounted speed at all times, even in PvE zones, and it's just a passive. I mean, look at the difference here I get on my mount when not using Continuous Attack. It's basically slower than run speed, and now with Continuous Attack active, you can see I am so much faster on my mount. This is going to make traversing through those massive PvE zones so much easier. You even get this at Assault Rank 3, which you can unlock in probably less than 30 minutes, with minimal PvP battles actually needing to be fought. Then there is the support skill line with skills like Guard for protecting other players, and the powerful Barrier Ultimate, which gives a huge damage shield. So there's definitely something here for everyone. Now, starting PvP in ESO is actually really simple. First, you're going to go to Campaigns and then click on Cyrodiil and choose whichever campaign is open, such as the under level 50 campaign. This is going to zone you into Cyrodiil, where you can start the PvP tutorial, where you can learn how to use Transmutation shrines to fast travel between keeps. Capturing keeps is basically the point of Cyrodiil, by the way, where you break down the keep's walls using siege weapons, and specifically try to capture these 6 inner keeps for your alliance and proclaim an emperor. For now though, simply follow this tutorial quest to learn all about fast travel and also how to use those various siege weapons. You learn more about protecting the Elder Scrolls, and you may even find a free Skyshard along the way, but doing this quest gives you alliance points, another form of currency in ESO that grants you PvP ranks. Now when you rank up in the alliance war, you gain additional skill points, just like you would a normal level up. Here I get 2 entire new skill points for free, and I also unlock those PvP skill lines I showcased earlier. From here you can choose to grab some more bounty quests from your alliance base, go out into Cyrodiil to raid keeps, or move on to the next form of PvP, which I like even better, called Imperial City. Imperial City also has a PvP campaign, which you can access through the campaigns menu. Selecting any campaign here will whisk you off to the Imperial City sewers and your makeshift alliance base underground. Imperial City is pretty interesting because it mixes in more PvE combat with lots of enemies located in the sewers and above in the districts, alongside potential PvP fights. That being said, you can fight for quite a while before you even see another player, and all the while you'll be earning a new type of currency called Telvar Stones, which you can use to buy more useful items like crafting materials and some powerful gear sets. Now, the above ground districts are a lot more dangerous, both in terms of enemies and also player groups, who tend to patrol the streets here a little bit more regularly. There are also capture points here, which you can protect or try to gain back for your alliance, depending on who is in control at the time. But mostly it's just a fun free-for-all with a lot of chaos and plenty of places to die. By the way, if you die in Imperial City, you'll lose a portion of those Telvar stones you are carrying, which adds an extra element of tension and strategy to this zone. But I would have to say that my favorite form of quick instance PvP content is by far ESO Battlegrounds. To get started here, just find the Battleground gladiators in any major city, read this letter, then talk to the Battlemaster, who will give you some basic quests to help you earn more alliance points and experience. To join a Battleground though, you'll need to use this Activity Finder menu and choose Battlegrounds. There are separate queues for solo players and groups, but you can actually join both, and it's not a huge difference at early levels until you get to endgame. So as I mentioned, Battlegrounds are instance PvP zones, and they're made up of 3 teams of 4 players each, all fighting at the same time. Now, different modes exist, like the most basic one I have here, which is Deathmatch. The team with the most kills after 15 minutes wins the game. But you also have Area Domination, which is essentially capture points. You have a game called Capture the Relic, which is also similar to Capture the Flag. Crazy King, which is moving control points, and then Chaos Ball, where your team has to carry a ball that is constantly damaging you for more and more damage. Now you'll get a match type here at random, and all of these are pretty fun, though I definitely prefer Deathmatch myself. But I hear you say again, well, what if I don't PvP? Well, the good thing about Battlegrounds and why I prefer it is, again, it's quick. Most matches last less than 10 minutes, and here's the key, even if your team comes in last place, you still are going to gain alliance points and experience. Plus, if you come in first or second place, you get even more experience for completing that once-a-day daily activity finder, and you'll also get plenty of rewards in your mailbox from doing these PvP activities, anything from powerful item sets to Transmute Stones, which can be used to change your gear traits. More on that in just a minute. But definitely do yourself the favor of trying PvP in ESO at least a few times. You may really like it, and if not, you'll at least be rewarded for your time. Now, speaking of that activity finder, another core activity of ESO is group dungeons, and the dungeon finder is a great way to get started here. Now, just like the Battlegrounds finder, the dungeon finder is going to place you into a new group, this time for a PvE 4-player dungeon. Now, these 4-player dungeons are a huge part of ESO, and there's literally dozens of them to choose from, but most are going to be level locked to you. Now, you can do a few of them as early as like level 10 or 15, I believe, but I really wouldn't start these until level 20 or so. Just like PvP, you want to be prepared, you want to have your backup skill bar ready, and you want to have a good amount of skills and passives. But once you're ready, you can browse the list of dungeons and queue up using that dungeon finder menu. Now, you'll need to pick a role as well of either DPS, healer, or tank, so make sure you have the corresponding skills for whatever role you choose. Damage skills for DPS, heals for a healer, and a taunt skill for a tank. It's pretty simple, especially early on with these easy dungeons. Now, once your group has been formed and everyone is ready, you'll automatically zone into the dungeon. Be sure to pick up the dungeon quest at the start for some bonus rewards later, but most players you group up with are going to be familiar with how to complete the dungeon, so I'd recommend just following the group and focusing on your role. Again, deal as much damage as you can as a DPS, cast those heals as a healer, and get enemies' attention using taunts and other crowd control skills as a tank. Also, be sure to watch your resources, because if you run out of stamina or magicka, not only could you die, but somebody on your group might die as well. Make sure to have potions slotted for this, make sure to use a food buff, and also make sure to heavy attack to restore resources. Now, at the end of the dungeon, you'll face a final boss, which shouldn't be too difficult at this level. DLC dungeons are totally different. You can't even start one of those until level 45, but these early dungeons are fairly easy, and me and my team of low-level players was able to knock it out no problem. We finished the boss, finished off that dungeon quest, and got a free skill point and more loot in the process. So it's around that time that you'll want to go through this dungeon list and finish each one at least one time to do each quest and get those extra skill points. Once a day, you should also do the random dungeon finder, which places you into a completely random dungeon appropriate to your level, and if your group completes that one, you get even more bonus experience and loot. This is another great tip for leveling up, by the way, especially if you have an experience scroll active. You can see for this one, I actually leveled up twice, which is amazing. Now, one more thing about group content here, specifically group dungeons and trials, is that there are actually different difficulty levels that you can select, and this comes into play above level 50, so just something to keep in mind for the future. But once you do hit level 50, you'll see on your character, in areas like the Dungeon Finder, for example, we can now queue for a random normal dungeon or a random veteran dungeon. Same thing if we were to choose specific dungeons. I have all my dungeons listed here in a tab for normal, and if I go over one, I have a tab for veteran. So what's the difference between normal and veteran? Well, essentially, the dungeons are the same. The difference is the enemies and how they scale. So in veteran dungeons and trials, those enemies will deal a lot more damage. They hit harder, basically, and they also have more health, so they do take longer to defeat. This comes into play especially in DLC dungeons and in trials where enemies can have millions of health in the veteran mode versions. Now, on top of veteran mode, there's also something called veteran hard mode, and that is where specific enemies in the encounter have additional mechanics. Maybe they have even more health. Maybe there's more enemies in the fight, different waves of adds that come in at certain times. Basically, it's the most challenging content you can get to, so it does require a good deal of coordination and practice. Of course, with this new type of content comes even more rewards, including new item sets that only drop in dungeons. These sets often have powerful effects and are great for all types of builds, including tanks, healers, and DPS, and just like the Overland set weights that we saw earlier, dungeon sets also come in groups of 3 different set weights per dungeon, 1 light armor set, 1 medium set, and 1 heavy set. Now, with the addition of our veteran dungeon mode that we mentioned earlier, we can unlock even one more type of dungeon set, and that is monster sets. These are 2-piece item sets composed of a head piece and shoulder piece, with the head being dropped only from the final boss of a dungeon, and only if that dungeon is completed in veteran mode or on veteran hard mode. The shoulder piece can be earned by completing quests for ESO's Undaunted Guild, which reward keys to chests which contain random shoulder pieces, which will match with a corresponding monster helmet. But it doesn't even stop there. More advanced sets are also available in many other forms of content. There's trial sets, there's PvP sets, battleground sets, arena sets, and even class sets in ESO's newest feature, that being the Infinite Archive. So there's always new gear to work towards in order to progress your character even further. But to take part in that more advanced content, or even just to take part in special events or make friends, it's always a good idea to explore ESO's player-led guilds. Now, similar to the Dungeon Finder, there is actually a guild finder and application system built right into ESO, and it's a great way to connect with other players. Here, you can search for the type of guild you're interested in, including trading guilds, group PvE guilds, role-playing, social, PvP, questing, and crafting. You can apply it to up to 5 guilds at once. As I said, it's a great way to connect with other players and even learn a few new things about the game. Guilds can also take advantage of some special features, so that being additional guild bank space to help store items or donate items to new players. Of course, you have the guild traders, which we mentioned earlier, so you can actually sell your items to other players. You have to join a guild for that. And there's also guild halls where you can have training dummies or build crafting stations and Mundus Stones even for much easier access. But ESO's community is, for the most part, fantastic. I highly recommend you get involved, and a great starting place is going to be joining some guilds. Now that you've been playing your character in some more challenging content like PvP and in dungeons, you might be thinking about changing things up as far as your starting build, right? What if you want to change the attribute points that you've already invested, or you want to change out your skill points? Well, you can do that in some of the major cities in the game, and all you need for that is gold, and you need some shrines. So shrines on your map will look like this. They may have different names depending upon your alliance zone that you're in currently, but you're looking for the rededication shrines, and there should be 3 of them in order to change your attributes and to change your skills. Now, currently for Aldmeri Dominion, I am in the zone of Grotwood, and if you're not sure how to get there, remember that in our main starting city for our alliance, for this case it was Auridon, you should have some ships here that can take you to different locations. So remember that you're not stuck in your starting zone. You can always travel. Even if you don't have those Wayshrines unlocked yet, these boats will take you there. So all I did was I used the boat here on this dock to go to Grotwood. Here I am in Grotwood, and here are my shrines. So, for example, let's say that I was not happy with my character being focused on Magicka. I want to focus on stamina instead. Just going to go up to this shrine. And then I can make a donation to reset my attribute points. So I can, for example, clear them all, put them into stamina. Now the other option is to respec your skill points, and you can do this in 2 ways. You can respec only the morphs, which is a nice way to save some gold, because all this will do is let you change from one morph to the other. Whereas if you reset your skills, this is all of your skill points. So morphs and the basic skills, this is obviously going to cost more gold because it's letting you reset more of the skills that you've chosen. But for example, if I just did my morphs, I could change Screaming Cliff Racer to a stamina morph called Cutting Dive. I could change Deep Fissure to another stamina morph called Subterranean Assault. And if I do that, it'll switch just those morphs for that amount of gold. Notice that I can't remove anything else. I can't remove this basic skill, and I cannot remove any passives. But if I choose the more costly option, that's where I can make those bigger adjustments. I can remove main skills, I can remove ultimates, I can remove morphs and skills, and I can also remove passives. So this would be more of a complete respec. Also note that you should have a hotkey to clear all. You want to clear absolutely everything. You can see now I have a total of 43 skill points on my new character that I can then reinvest as I need to. But even if you've changed your skills and your attributes, what if you need to change your actual gear itself? Well, that's where the transmutation system comes into play, as well as reconstruction. Transmute stations were introduced back in the Clockwork City DLC, and you can still find one here, or you can purchase one for your own home or guild hall. It's here where you can take any of your gear set pieces and change their trait to something completely different. For example, I can change the trait on this necklace from its default trait of Arcane to something a bit better like Bloodthirsty. Now this has just two requirements. Number one, you have to have previously researched the new trait that you want to transmute this item to. So in this case, I must have researched the Bloodthirsty necklace trait to make this change. Remember, going back to the beginning of this guide, I mentioned research and how it's one of the most important things you can do with crafting early on. But you can also see here that I need another currency to do this as well, called Transmute Crystals. How do you get Transmute Crystals? Well, it's mostly through group content and the activity finder. So those random dungeons and random battlegrounds that we looked at earlier. So assuming you have both enough crystals and you've previously researched the trait, you can change that gear piece to any trait that you want and eliminate the need to farm gear for your perfect trait. Simply get one set piece with any trait at all and then transmute it to the trait that you want. Another great option here is the Reconstruction tab, which allows you to create any set piece you've already collected by using, you guessed it, Transmute Crystals. Remember that we talked about the different ways you can collect gear pieces in ESO. Typically that has to do with binding it to your character, but also trashing it or selling it to a vendor. These are actions that collect the gear and put it in your sticker book, which you can see here. So to make use of Reconstruction, let's say that I wanted to build a new Mother's Sorrow necklace with a Bloodthirsty trait. Now I can do that again because I've collected the necklace for the Mother's Sorrow set and because I've researched the Bloodthirsty trait, but notice I can't create any other Mother's Sorrow necklace. I can't do a protective necklace or a swift necklace. Again, it all comes down to research. I haven't researched those traits, so I can't build those items. But due to how these systems work, it does make more sense to actually research the best traits first, especially traits that are common to most builds. I'm talking about Divine's traits for armor, the Infused or Bloodthirsty trait for jewelry, or the Precise trait for weapons. Also note that my cost for reconstructing any set piece here depends on how many pieces I've collected for that set. And if I've collected them all, I get down to the minimum cost, which is 25 transmute crystals, and this process now actually becomes cheaper than actually transmuting the piece, which always costs 50. Now, another great feature that has to do with customizing, preparing, and saving your builds is something you can use in the housing system, and this is called the Armory Station. Now, this technically is a piece of furniture, but you can get this for free from the Crown Store, and you can put it in your house. Basically, it's a way to save everything that you've added to your character, including, your skills, your attribute points, gear loadout, even champion points, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But you can basically save your build exactly as you have it set up, and then you could re-equip new gear and new skills, respec your attributes to make a completely different build for something else. So maybe I have one build for PvP and another build for PvE, or one build for soloing and another build for group content. I can store those in my Armory Station and I can swap to them whenever I want. And this is going to save you so much time, especially when you get to endgame and builds become a little bit more complicated. This is a great system to make use of. So you can see here on my Templar character, I've just set up sort of an easy solo build, and I've saved all of my current skills, front bar and back bar, champion point, loadout, attributes, weapons, armor, basically everything that goes into making your build what it is. Customize it with a name, even give it a unique icon to help you remember, and you're good to go. So again, you can save quite a bit of time. Once you come up with a build that you like, make sure to unlock your free Armory Station. You can put it in that starter house that we got in the first Overland Zone, and save and swap between builds whenever you want. So as you saw with my more advanced build, this was taking advantage of another progression system that you're going to get once you hit level 50, and this is called Champion Points. Champion Points are based off 3 constellations. These are called Craft, or the green tree. We have Warfare, also called the blue tree, and then Fitness, also known as the red tree. Now, these all have different focuses. The Craft tree is, as you might expect, sort of focused on crafting, quality of life improvements, different things that don't necessarily affect your combat. Then Warfare is all about damage, healing, and tanking, so there'll be something here regardless of the role that you decide to play. And then the Red Star Fitness is more about survivability, so we have things like speed, damage reduction, resource management, increased armor. Those are the types of bonuses we can get from the Fitness tree. Now these are called trees because they do follow a progression from node to node. I can show you by clearing my champion point tree out. Now I only have a few places I can start. I can start in Precision, or I can start with Tireless Discipline, or with Eldritch Insight, and then I'm going to spend and then move on from there. Now, the way that you unlock these points is by leveling up, as I said, past level 50. You'll get something called a champion point level. These come much quicker than level 1 to 50. You can literally grind a champion point in just a couple minutes. If you're killing a lot of enemies or you turn in a major quest, you might get a couple champion point level ups at the same time. So what you do is you spend those champion points unlocking nodes. Once you put the minimum required amount of points into that node, you can see it expands the tree, and I can then use more champion point nodes. So as you can see in this example, I have put 10 champion points into Precision. This gives me some critical chance. Now I've unlocked these different options, and I could put points into, let's say, Fighting Finesse. Fighting Finesse increases my critical damage and critical healing. So this is going to be a powerful offensive node that I can use on, let's say, a DPS or a solo build to increase my damage. And the other thing you'll note about these is there's sort of two different types of stars, and they do look different. You can see this one with the gold tint looks different from this one, which is much brighter and shining here. The way these are different is the gold stars are passive. You just simply get the bonus by putting in the points. The brighter ones, the ones that are shining, are slottables. Sometimes I'll call these slotted stars. And so what I can do with this is drag it or put it into my slots at the top. And you can see that in each constellation, in each tree, I'm in the blue tree, I have 4 spots where I can put these slottables. So there's Fighting Finesse, increasing my critical damage and critical healing. Now you may also notice some sort of pink or purple tinted stars, and these are like sub-constellations or sub-trees. This one is called Extended Might, and if I click into this one, you can see it opens up and I have some more options here. And the same thing goes with the tree structure. I have to unlock the central node by putting the minimum number of points into it. In this case, you can see sort of the breakpoint in this bar. I have to invest at least 10 out of 20 champion points to progress further in the subtree. So I'll go ahead and put 10 points there. You can see now I've unlocked the surrounding nodes. And I'll do something here like Weapons Expert. This is very good for if I have a heavy attack focus build. This is going to increase my damage done. Finally, note that you do have those different breakpoints, up to 5 in this case. Those are called stages, and basically the bonus gets progressively better with each stage that you unlock. It's going to be different for each star. This one goes by tens, so you can see it starts at 0, goes up by 10, so 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 points, and I'm getting 4% bonus damage for each 10 points that I invest. And don't forget, since this is a shining, bright, slottable star, I'm going to need to put it up here in my bar to actually take advantage of that benefit. The other thing here that is sometimes confusing is the way that your champion points are split. So this character has about 1,200 champion points. As I said, these come very quickly once you get past level 50, so don't worry about the number. There's actually a maximum of 3,600 champion points that you can get in ESO. Not a lot of players have that much. They do have diminishing returns, so anything sort of over 1,000, you're not going to see as much benefit as you do before 1,000 points. But I also want you to notice that your champion points are split into these 3 groups. So I have 400 fitness points available. I have 400 craft points available, and I've already used up about 120 of my warfare points. So in other words, I can't spend all 1,200 of my points on the blue tree and do nothing else. My total points are split between the 3 trees. You can't transfer points between trees, in other words. But so far, we've really only talked about ESO's new Gold Road chapter, plus its base game features. But there are a few additional chapter expansion features that I wanted to highlight here because they are just so good. And if you bought the collection edition for Gold Road, you're going to get all of the previous chapter expansions bundled in anyway, so you'll be able to explore these additional features as well. Now, one of my favorites is the Companions system. Companions are essentially your adventuring buddy, and they're great for helping you complete more challenging content on your own that you wouldn't normally be able to do. Now, they can't join you in PvP, but they can join in PvE content, like against world bosses, help you with world events, and even help you through 4-player dungeons and arenas. In fact, you can even try to solo that 4-player content with nothing but you and your companion, and it is actually doable in some cases if you set them up the right way. Now, each companion is also built around a specific class theme, with the most recent two being a Xandar the Arcanist and Sharp as Knight the Warden, but there's also a Dragon Knight companion, a Nightblade, a Sorcerer, and a Templar companion, and they all have their own strengths in combat, as well as different personality quirks. In fact, companions have their own likes and dislikes, and will call you out on it if they like what you're doing or they disapprove. And finally, companions progress their level and skills through combat, so it does make sense to grab a companion early on, finish their starting quest, and have them join you and then level them up as you level up. As I said, it can make some content easier, and it's also just a really fun and detailed system. Now, another great system you'll want to start working on eventually is called Antiquities, which starts in the Greymoor chapter, but is used throughout the game. Now, Antiquities includes the new skill lines of Scrying and Excavation, where you traverse Tamriel as sort of a mystical archaeologist of sorts, uncovering remains of ancient items that you can then piece together to form mythic set items. Now, these are extremely powerful one-piece item sets like the Ring of the Pale Order, which heals you back whenever you deal damage, or the Oaken Soul Ring, which limits you to 1 skill bar but gives you tons of powerful buffs in the process. Now, this system does take a bit longer to level up, but is definitely worth the investment because you'll want to start using these items once you hit endgame to make your build stronger or just give you more options. But the great thing about both Antiquities and Companions is that nearly every chapter moving forward has included either new companions or new mythic items, so these are systems that build up over time, and I assume this is how the new scribing system for the Gold Road chapter is going to be as well. But there's even more advanced content you can complete in ESO, from the 12-player trials, to arenas, to the new Infinite Archive Zone, and even player housing that we won't have time to expand on in this video. This is a beginner's guide after all, but I will say that there is almost no limit to what you can do in the Elder Scrolls Online, and I think that's why I've enjoyed the game myself for so long. It seems like there's always something to do or somewhere new to explore, and every year even more content gets added to the game, so it's something you can truly invest in going forward. Now, if you'd like some of those additional resources on more advanced content, I definitely recommend you check out our website. Just Google Hack the Minotaur or head over to hacktheminotaur.com. Over there we have hundreds of builds and guides for ESO at this point. We're always adding new content to keep up with the game. I'm posting more guides on scribing and even scribing-focused builds right now for the new Gold Road chapter, for example, so go check those out when you have a chance. And lastly, don't forget to like this video if you got some use out of it, and ask any questions you have down in the comments section below. Or if you have advice for new players, make those comments too. Big thanks again to Bethesda for sponsoring this video, and I will see you around in the next one.